I'm Pip Tomson and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Arabiya News headquarters. These are our top stories. Israel discuss imminent ceasefire plans with Hezbollah, which could bring an end to a 14-month conflict ignited by the war in Gaza. True to his word, Donald Trump promises to impose tax tariffs for goods arriving in the United States from China, Mexico and Canada when he becomes president. And Russia expel a British national on accusations of spying as they demand answers from the UK ambassador. A ceasefire deal between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon could be struck within hours. That's according to Israeli and Lebanese officials. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is expected to make a statement on the matter in the next hour. However, earlier today, the Israeli army attacked Hezbollah targets in the Beirut area after they issued evacuation orders for residents in the city. For more on this, I'm joined from Tel Aviv by our correspondent Sarah Coates. Sarah, good evening. Do we know what Netanyahu will say in his statement, which is expected in around an hour's time?
You're certainly right about that, Pip. It is widely expected that the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will actually announce this ceasefire in Lebanon, this ceasefire with Hezbollah, and that will happen, as you said, in less than an hour. It's also very likely that he will say things along the lines of Israel adopting a zero tolerance policy, which means basically that if there is any kind of threat coming from Lebanon, that Israel will have the right to respond militarily. Now, also to appease his base, we can expect Netanyahu to say something along the lines that Israel's war goals in the south of Lebanon have been achieved, that Hezbollah has been basically eradicated in that area, and that it is safe potentially for the 60,000 or so internally displaced Israelis to be able to go home. Now, he has been holding this meeting with his security cabinet over the past couple of hours, and this ceasefire deal is largely based on the UN resolution 1701, which would mean that these Hezbollah fighters would need to push further north, back behind the Litani River, and that Israeli troops would completely need to pull out of Lebanon. Now, this would all be overseen by a five-body party. It would be headed up by the United States. And, Pip, on that, we are expecting a joint announcement from the US President Joe Biden and the French President Emmanuel Macron in just a few hours' time.
Despite this progress, Sarah, there seems to be no let-up in the attacks, though, with Beirut targeted by the IDF today. So could that affect any deal that's struck?
That's right. These negotiations have been happening under intense fire, and generally before there is any kind of a ceasefire deal, there will be a real uptick in hostilities, and that is exactly what we are seeing on the ground. It was only about half an hour or so ago that the IDF spokesperson, the Arabic spokesperson, put out a fresh evacuation order, the first of its kind since this war began, for targets in central Beirut. And there is absolute mayhem on the ground, people leaving by the thousands, trying to get out of the danger zone, with strikes reported since then. Now, the Lebanese health authorities have been saying that so far in that area, the death toll stands at 10 people. It is certainly expected to rise, given that this is a very densely populated area. And in addition to this, there have been strikes on the southern suburbs of Beirut, in Dahia, and also down in the Tyre region in southern Lebanon. So certainly an extremely deadly day in Lebanon. And as we go to air, red alert sirens are going off in these largely evacuated northern Israeli communities. There have also been a number of hostile aircraft threats coming in over the past minutes. So certainly no let-up of hostilities, Pep.
Sarah Coates in Tel Aviv, thank you very much. Turning to the United States now, and President-elect Donald Trump is making good on his campaign promises, and he's doing it in a hurry. The US President-elect has announced plans to slap hefty tariffs on America's three top trading partners on his very first day in office. In a post on Truth Social, he said he'll introduce 25% tariff duties on goods coming from Canada and Mexico, and add an extra 10% on those from China, which are already subject to some extra fees. Those nations have hit back at the decision, as Benji Hire reports.
Is Trump serious about tariffs? Well, it seems we have our answer. The former and future president is willing to blow up trade deals he signed in his first term on just day one of his second. Countries the world over are raising the alarm, but also urging caution, insisting it's too early to talk of countermeasures.
Last night's decision could be an indication that he is very serious. First, the EU must respond united to this and not tear itself apart into 2 or 3 blocks of countries, but speak as a united Europe. Second, we must make clear that ultimately everyone loses: the United States, the United States' economic area, and Europe.
The US policy on trade with China, with other countries as well, will have impact. And that is really an important element that we have to consider.
Mexico, China and Canada are the USA's top 3 suppliers of imported goods, accounting for about 42% of imports this year, roughly $1.5 trillion. Cars, electrical equipment, oil, grocery and household items. The domestic companies importing the goods will be the ones paying the price, not the foreign companies exporting them. And the cost may be passed down to consumers. Donald Trump insists the policy is in response to crime and drugs, he says, coming across the border, and that tariffs will stay in place until Mexico and Canada clamp down on illegal immigration. But the leader of Canada's most populous province, Ontario, fears these new taxes would be devastating to workers and jobs, while the head of Mexico's Senate points the finger back at the United States, claiming it's Americans who need to stop consuming drugs. And China, well, it calls the move irresponsible, warning no one will win a trade war, though there may be some relief in Beijing that Trump has cooled on the idea of a 60% tariff rate he'd once threatened. The markets have reacted only moderately, suggesting the risk of tariffs had already largely been priced in by investors, who were counting on Scott Bessent, the man Trump wants as his new Treasury Secretary, to prevent his boss from doing anything too rash. As 45th president, Trump pushed tariffs as a means of protecting American jobs. This time, as 47th president, the message is different, but the strategy is the same. Benji Hire, Arabiya News, Washington.
Let's get more on this from Washington by our correspondent, Kate Fisher. Hello to you, Kate. Now, part of the reason people voted for Donald Trump is to get more money in their pockets. Is that trust a bit misplaced in light of this tariffs plan? And do you think he's actually serious?
Well, you can never tell with Donald Trump, Pip, whether he is going to do exactly what he says. There are some analysts here who think the fact that he's made these announcements 2 months before he's even in the Oval Office suggests this is more of an opening salvo into negotiations. But there are others that say, you know, he does mean what he says. He's being very specific about this. Certainly, if he does do this on day one, it's not going to give countries much time for negotiation. Economists, though, generally agree that they don't think it's going to be good for the US consumer. American households, some suggesting it will cost them around $1,000 a year, these tariffs. That's because most of the companies that import the goods, which will then be more expensive to import, will pass those costs on to the consumer, the Americans who are buying them. There are concerns about job losses and the higher cost of groceries, for example. The US got more than half its fresh fruit from Mexico in 2022, so that's going to drive prices up at the supermarket.
Why does he want to target China more than Canada and Mexico, for example? And what is China saying about this?
Yeah, China and Trump have a long history of trade wars. And Trump, even on the campaign trail, was threatening up to 60% tariffs on China. So some may argue this is them getting off a bit lightly. His reasoning is that it's because they're not doing enough to crack down on illegal fentanyl trafficking. That's that really strong opiate that a lot of which is made in China. Donald Trump saying on Truth Social that they promised they would institute the maximum penalty, that of death, for any drug dealers, but unfortunately they never followed through. And this is his reasoning for why China should be getting even more tariffs. They have said that this is an irresponsible response, and they have said that no one will win if there's a trade war.
Finally, Kate, we know that quite a few eyebrows were raised over Trump's cabinet picks. And one thing that raised my eyebrows was wrestling star Hulk Hogan eyeing up a place in his administration. What can you tell us about that? Is it going to happen?
Well, certainly Donald Trump hasn't made any official announcements about Hulk Hogan, but he is a big Trump supporter. He spoke at that now famous rally in Madison Square Gardens in New York City, where Donald Trump went to New York, even though it's a typically Democratic stronghold, just before the election, and held this big rally. Hulk Hogan was one of the people speaking at that. He is certainly a big star and a big personality. Apparently, Hulk Hogan says that he was speaking to Donald Trump about nutrition and fitness at that rally behind the scenes, and Donald Trump suggested that he could lead the President's Council for Physical Fitness, but no official word yet from the Trump team.
OK. Sounds very interesting if Hulk Hogan arrives at the White House. Kate Fisher in Washington, thank you so much. Let's return to the ongoing ceasefire talks in Israel, and I'm joined now by Dr. Yossi Beilin, a former Israeli justice minister and initiator of the Oslo Agreement. Hello to you, Dr. Beilin. Thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you for having me.
How optimistic are you that this ceasefire will happen and that it will hold, perhaps permanently?
From the Israeli point of view, it will happen. And I hope that also from the Lebanese point, and there will be a ceasefire very, very soon, in a few hours. So this is good news. And then about the sustainability of this ceasefire, that's another question. I can hope that it will be sustainable. The point is that as long as Hezbollah is a militia and a political party, it's very, very difficult to believe that it will not use its power eventually, maybe not very soon. But what we are seeing right now is apparently a decision of Iran to allow Hezbollah to have the ceasefire which it needs and to disconnect what's happening between Israel and Lebanon and what's happening between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. Because the whole thing for Hezbollah was to insist upon solidarity with Gaza immediately after the crazy massacre by Hamas on October 7th last year. So now it is disconnected, and this is a good sign for me. I hope that it will be possible to continue the efforts towards ceasefire also in Gaza.
Right, because, sorry to interrupt, that's what I just wanted to ask you, Dr. Beilin, is this particular ceasefire deal, is it completely separate to Israel-Gaza war? Will it have any impact?
It is not separate at all. I mean, as I said, this was the reason or the excuse for Hezbollah to launch a war against Israel. And if there is no connection now, and the Hezbollah is ready for such a ceasefire, then Hamas is left alone in a very, very poor situation. Also under the criticism of the population in Gaza, which is suffering a lot, no doubt, from this war. And they know exactly who launched this war and what was the ramifications of this very, very cruel decision of Yahya Sinwar to launch such an attack against Israel. So I hope that there is a chance now to have a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, and that the suffering of the civilians on both sides will stop.
David Mentzer, an Israeli government spokesperson, suggested that Israel will have the freedom to conduct military operations inside Lebanon as part of this agreement. Now, why would the Lebanese and Hezbollah agree to this, given their strong opposition to this initially? And what does Hezbollah get in return?
Well, I'm not privy to the details of the agreement. It has not been exposed by the parties. So there are only rumors about it. And apparently each side is trying to emphasize what seems to it as a very important achievement. I think that in reality, at least that was the ideas hovering in the last days, is that there will be a special monitoring group of Americans, Frenchmen, and others who will monitor the implementation of the agreement, and that no step will be committed by any side as long as this monitoring committee doesn't decide who is to blame for the breaching of the future breach, if it happens, of the agreement. So it is not just, according to what I know, it's not just that Israel can decide whenever it wants that the Hezbollah breach the agreement, but it will go through a scanning process. So it is more complicated. And I believe that is something that also Hezbollah eventually had to agree to.
Dr. Yossi Beilin, former Israeli Justice Minister and initiator of the Oslo Agreement. So interesting to talk to you. Thank you for talking to us on W News.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Let's take a look at some of the other stories making headlines today. 4 bodies have been discovered and 5 survivors have been rescued after a tourist boat sank in the Red Sea yesterday. Rescue teams are continuing to search the area south of the Egyptian coastal town of Marsa Alam, where the Sea Story went down. Protesters supporting the release of former Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan are being tear-gassed by armed forces as they arrive in the barricaded area of Democracy Square in Islamabad. Khan is currently serving 3 years in prison on corruption charges, which he denies. A fight broke out in the Serbian parliament today between the government and its opposition. It's after a train roof collapsed and killed 15 people. The shadow government has accused the main party of not taking responsibility. 79-year-old rocker Sir Rod Stewart is confirmed as Glastonbury's first headline for 2025. Sir Rod Stewart will return to the Pyramid stage on the last day of the music festival. And the world's oldest man has died at the age of 112 in Southport in England. John Tinniswood was born in Liverpool in the United Kingdom in 1912, the same year the Titanic sank. John previously said the secret to staying healthy was practicing moderation. Moving on to Russia now, where a British national who worked at the UK embassy in Moscow has been expelled from the country after being accused of spying. They're the seventh British diplomat to be expelled from Moscow since August. Earlier today, the British ambassador to Russia, Nigel Casey, was pictured arriving at Russia's defence ministry for questioning. For more on this, I'm joined from Moscow by our correspondent, Dasha Chernyshova. Hello to you, Dasha. Thanks for talking to me. What more can you tell us about this expulsion?
Yes, indeed. We understand that the Russian Federal Security Service has released the information that they had proof that the second secretary of the political department of the British Embassy in Russia, Edward Wilkes Pryor, has been conducting espionage and saboteur activities in Russia. Following that, we have seen the Russian Foreign Ministry summoning the British ambassador to Russia, Nigel Casey, and after having spent there about an hour, we understand the Russian Foreign Ministry has issued a statement saying that they give 2 days to this prior employee at the embassy to leave the Russian Federation, because Moscow says it is not going to tolerate any activities of the foreign intelligence in Russia. And they also insist that while receiving accreditation and credentials to work in Russia, this employee has submitted the wrong information. So Moscow says it is yet another case where it is expelling the British diplomat. Keep in mind that earlier this year we have seen 6 British diplomats already being expelled from Russia, also on accusations of the espionage.
What about the timing of all this, Dasha? And is this the latest ploy from Putin to paint the UK as the enemy?
Well, certainly the timing is quite escalatory, if you would like to put it this way, because we have seen the relations between Russia and the West going from bad to worse, and Russia is accusing the Western countries of being involved into the conflict in Ukraine by allowing Ukraine to use their long-range weapons to strike targets inside Russia. We understand that Storm Shadows supplied by the United Kingdom have already attacked the facilities on Russia's sovereign territory, and Russia says that it is the Anglo-Saxon world, as they often refer to the Western countries, and particularly the United Kingdom and the United States, that are trying to defeat Russia strategically. We've heard the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, early on Tuesday saying that any discussion about preventive strikes against Russia, any discussions about the possibility of defeating Russia strategically, they come from only one thing: the eternal desire of the Western countries to destroy Russia. And this is the ultimate goal, which Moscow says the Western countries are no longer trying to conceal. So from the Russian perspective, it is yet another case. But again, the timing, you can take any moment and say it is going from bad to worse, because certainly the relations between Russia and the West have not been experiencing any sort of relief, only getting worse and worse over the course of the past years.
And winter is fast approaching. And many people might think with the very cold weather, the fighting might slow down. But actually, it looks like Russia is making gains. And how important, Dasha, are those gains?
Well, certainly the Russian Defense Ministry has been talking about gains the Russian military have been making over the course of the past months, and those are the gains and the improvement of their combat positions. However, keep in mind that the Ukrainian troops are still controlling large swaths of Russia's Kursk region, where they have started the incursion earlier this year. We also hear in the Russian Defense Ministry saying that they are going to achieve their goals one way or another, be it militarily or by other means. So certainly the situation for the Russian military could change come winter, but it will also change for the Ukrainian military. So in terms of importance of those gains, they are improving the positions, they are also moving the front line, they are also moving the possibility of Ukraine to strike targets deep inside Russia, further away from the Russian borders, and also taking the front line away from the civilian population, because just on Tuesday we've heard a settlement in Novokakhovka in Russia, in the Kherson region, being targeted by the Ukrainian military. At least 4 people, 4 civilians, we understand, were killed after the bus was shelled by the Ukrainian armed forces. At the same time, what we are also hearing from the Russian military is that they are preparing their retaliatory actions against Ukrainian use of long-range weapons supplied to Kyiv by the Western countries, because the Russian MOD has confirmed on Tuesday that there have been 2 incidents where ATACMS missiles were actually used by Ukraine just over the course of the past 3 days.
Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow. Thank you. Let's take a look at some of the top business news. And British car manufacturer Vauxhall have announced plans to close its Luton factory in England next April. More than 1,000 jobs are at risk, but parent company Stellantis said it hopes to transfer hundreds of workers to the group's other site in Ellesmere Port in Cheshire. The Walt Disney Company has agreed to pay a $43.3 million legal settlement that alleged its female employees in California earned $150 million less than their male counterparts over an 8-year period. As part of the agreement, Disney will keep a Labour economist on board for the next 3 years to analyse pay equity amongst staff. Saudi Arabia's total expenditure for 2025 is projected at $342 billion. That's after a cabinet meeting chaired by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman approved the kingdom's budget earlier today. The total estimated revenue for the next year is $315.73 billion, indicating a deficit of $26.88 billion, or 2.3% of the country's GDP. International banking firm Citigroup is cutting the number of year-end promotions as the company looks to keep costs down. Around 2,000 employees could see an increase in pay and titles next month, as opposed to the usual 8,000 in previous years. Bringing you a bit of sports news now, and US car maker General Motors could enter Formula One in 2026 with a luxury Cadillac. The American manufacturer will name a new team and build its own engine, that is if the application is approved. They would become the 11th team to Formula One for the 2026 season. And in football, Tottenham Hotspur goalkeeper Guglielmo Vicario has undergone surgery after playing with a broken ankle against Manchester City at the weekend. The Italian keeper was given treatment in the first half following a collision with City's Savinho, but played the full 90 minutes during Tottenham's 4-0 win. Prosecutors in France have asked for the maximum 20-year sentence for Dominique Pelicot, the man behind the country's mass rape trial. Pelicot has admitted drugging his then-wife, Giselle Pelicot, and encouraging other men to sexually abuse her in their home for over a decade. 49 other men are also on trial for taking part in the abuse. For more on this, I'm joined from Paris by our correspondent, Ross Cullen. Hello to you, Ross. Now, this is a case which has drawn attention from all over the world, and prosecutors are seeking a tough sentence for Pelicot as a result.
Yeah, that's right. The front cover of the latest edition of Vogue Germany was dedicated to Giselle Pelicot, with "No More Shame" as the headline on the front cover of the magazine. It is a case that has stunned France, that has shocked the world, and has been followed around the globe. Prosecutors confirming that they will be asking the judges to apply the maximum possible sentence of 20 years to Giselle Pelicot's now former husband, Dominique Pelicot, who had admitted drugging his wife and then recruiting men online to come to their family home to have sex with Gisèle Pelicot. And we can go into some of the claims by the defendants a little bit later on. But Dominique Pelicot has been at the heart of this case for orchestrating the abuse that was taking place over a 9-year period to his wife in the family home. We have seen massive demonstrations in recent days in France because yesterday, November the 25th, was the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, and then a couple of days earlier, huge demonstrations across France in support of all victims of rape and attempted rape, and especially in support of Gisèle Pelicot. Since this trial has been going on this autumn, she has become a feminist icon for waiving her anonymity and asking for this to be a public trial with all the video evidence and everything that has been taking place in the court. She has been praised for her bravery and also the support from people around the world for what has taken place.
Have we heard from the 49 others who are on trial with Dominique Pelicot?
Yeah, that's right. 51 men on trial, 50 of them in court. Dominique Pelicot and 49 others, one man being tried in absentia. We have heard from some of the defendants. More than 30 of them have said that they don't believe that they are rapists. It's not something that is in their mind, their mentality. It's not them. It's not who they are. Despite the fact that there is video evidence of the abuse taking place, they have said that they thought they were taking part in a game. They believed that Gisèle Pelicot was pretending to sleep. They believed that they were being invited into the family home to take part in a couple's fantasy game orchestrated by Dominique Pelicot. There has been also support for some of these men from their family members saying they can't believe that this man could be a rapist. It's not who he is. But that has been a call that we have also heard from some of the demonstrators throughout this autumn. There have been weekly demonstrations in support of Gisèle Pelicot who have said that they believe that men who carry out a sexual assault could be anybody. They're not specific, quote, monsters. They could be a brother, an uncle, a friend, a father, a work colleague, just a regular person. They're not particularly, they want to get away from this idea that rape is something that happens only with a man that they've described as a monster. This has been a real driving force of this case in the demonstrations. The rape can be carried out by any man at any time, particularly a family member.
Ross Cullen in Paris, thank you. Let's remind you of our top stories. Israel discuss imminent ceasefire plans with Hezbollah, which could bring an end to a 14-month conflict ignited by the war in Gaza. True to his word, Donald Trump promises to impose tax tariffs for goods arriving in the United States from China, Mexico and Canada when he becomes president. And Russia expel a British national on accusations of spying as they demand answers from the UK ambassador. And that's just about it from us on W News. Thank you so much for your company. Tom Burges Watson talks to you next on GNT. A very good night.
Irene, thank you so much for joining Al Arabiya. I want to kick off by asking you to sort of walk me through how you view your role within NATO, because women today are under pressure in various parts of the world and, frankly, in the West.
So first of all, thank you for the invitation, the opportunity to have this moment of exchange about a very important topic, not only women in NATO, but I would say on women across the globe and about our rights and the general pushback, I would say, that we are facing today. The role I have at NATO, I'm the NATO Secretary General Special Representative for Women, Peace and Security, is not new. I'm the fourth Special Representative. The position was established in 2012. But after 12 years, I have to say that despite the progress that we have made within the alliance, there is still much to do. Of course, the work I do within NATO is around the mandate of the alliance. So it's specific about the role of women and peace and security. So we do not cover other issues. But of course, what we do contributes to advancing gender equality. And it is also stated in our latest strategic concept endorsed in Madrid in 2022 that advancing gender equality is a reflection of the common values of the alliance. So what I do is really to look at everything that the alliance does to make sure that gender perspectives are included. What does this mean? It means that every time we take a decision, both at political and a military level, we have to make sure that we consider the diversity of the population. Population is made by half by men and the other half by women, so we cannot take decision without considering that security is perceived in a different way by men and women.
No doubt. How concerned are you when you see President-elect Trump's pick for defense saying that women shouldn't be in combat roles?
This is a topic that has been discussed over the decades around the globe. The hope was that we had overcome the barriers, the cultural barriers. Certainly we have overcome the legal barriers. So everywhere across allies and also in our partners, countries, women are part of the armed forces. In different extents, I would say across NATO allies, we have an average of 12%. So if we look at the population, as I said, 50% made by women, there is still a big gap to cover this percentage. I think that we still have a lot of work to overcome cultural barriers and change the mindset. We are not all at the same stage. So this conversation will certainly be put at the table, but there is a general consensus that women have to be part of the military forces. And we have proof that nowadays, if we look at Ukraine, how incredible women are fighting now on the front line. Since the full-scale invasion, a lot of women have joined voluntarily, and that's very important to say, that they were not obliged to do it. They are around 60,000 now in the armed forces. More than 40,000 are civilians, but the rest are military, and 5,000 are fighting on the front line alongside with their male colleagues.
If the United States rolls back women's role in the military, and I mean in combat positions, does that weaken the NATO alliance and the NATO mission?
I'm not expecting this change to happen. Of course, I'm expecting maybe some conversation around this, but there is a consensus. There are policies in place. This year in Washington, D.C., on our big yearly summit, we endorse a new women, peace and security policy. When we endorse a policy, 32 allies come together and they agree on what is on the policy.
Including the United States.
Including.
Yeah.
Indeed, and this lasts for 5 years. And the policy states very clearly that increasing participation of women in all peace and security efforts, both on the diplomatic and in the military side, is what we have to do if we want to enhance our operational effectiveness. Yeah. And this is where my work leads, to the implementation of this policy that will be translated next year in a new action plan. We are working on it. And this is where I will concentrate my efforts.
Yeah. Talk to me about this. You mentioned Ukraine and the role of women there in combat positions that they've taken on as an act of necessity. There's a lot of conversation, of course, about how that war may come to a conclusion. In your mind, are women better prepared to take on roles not just in the military now, but also in government in Ukraine?
I think as historically we have seen how wars change the role of women within the society. They open up different possibilities because men go to the front line. In this case, the front line is both physical and also on the space, because we see the war in Ukraine played on the hybrid space and cybersecurity, but also with very old technique on the front line. Women have filled the position in Ukraine as they did in the past during the First World War and Second World War. We see incredible women in politics at governmental level. We see women on the front line and covering all roles in the society. Even in the defense industry recently, women have stepped up and take more positions. So I think this has worked as an accelerator for the society, and I expect that women will continue to play an important role in the resolution of the conflict and in the post-conflict, where we hope a just peace will happen soon, and we will see women to continue to take their important position.
When are we going to see a NATO Secretary General who is a woman? Because I know that was something that was mooted at the time, at the last round of conversations about this.
There was a lot of conversation about this. We need to find the best candidates. I will always say there are some requirements, and requirements are that the Secretary General has to be a former Prime Minister or a President. And this is where the conversation has to be broader.
Yes.
Because the point is, why don't we have more women in politics covering this position? Because automatically then we could have more candidates for the position of the Secretary General. So now we have just welcomed our new Secretary General, Mark Rutte, but as you might heard, this week he announced a Deputy Secretary General, who is a woman and from North Macedonia, and she will join us in supposedly a few weeks. And she's the second one in the history, so it's already a progress. And I think maybe next one could be.
Could it be Giorgia Meloni?
She's read in my mind, because the conversation we had, it's also about the South and the rotation. You know, in alliance,
Exactly.
we're trying to rotate, and sometimes, I mean, we see a tendency to have a Secretary General coming from the northern countries, and there was a conversation about the South, but the requirements didn't come together. So one option could be to change the requirements, and the other is to see more Prime Minister in the South. So, of course, Giorgia Meloni could be a candidate in the future.
Walk me through this. Today, the rest of this region continues to reel over what we've seen happen in Afghanistan, and I'm talking about the subjugation of women and girls. Obviously, that was an area of serious concern for NATO, and when coalition forces were there. In your mind, what is the responsibility of NATO today to those women that we promised a future and then abandoned?
That's a difficult conversation to take. You know that NATO operates under mandates, and when we operate out of our area of responsibility, we do based on resolution of the United Nations Security Council. We withdraw, the mission is over. So as an alliance, we do no longer have a responsibility there collectively, because we are no longer present. But of course, allies, individually and bilaterally, and in different contexts, such as
and as human beings.
Yes, and they continue to provide support. The situation is very worrisome. There are no words to describe what happened. And I think that individually, as I said, a human being, and with our respective roles at national level, we have to continue to speak out about what is happening there, and to fight for women's rights, because the silence will really put them, you know, in a we will forgive about them, even if we don't do. But in the global conversation, you see, if you read the newspaper, it doesn't really come on the news so often.
What do you think is the solution there in your mind? Because obviously there is an ability of nations who are giving aid to Afghanistan to exert pressure on them.
If I could have a solution, you know, I would try to put this, implement it. I found that extremely difficult. What I'm doing on my side is to continue dialogue with women from Afghan and see if there is a way to support. One of the focus is always how to train women to create space for dialogue for them, in terms of dialogue also with the Taliban or mediation processes. And I know that there are several women who are also present in Doha a few years ago that continue the dialogue and try also to train younger generation to make sure that they will have the possibility to play a role and to exercise their right.
When you come to a forum like this one, based in the United Emirates, a country that has promoted women, not just to positions in government, also mandated their participation on boards in the private sector, are you encouraged by what you see and how the region is evolving?
Indeed, I am very much. I'm very happy to be here and to have the opportunity to engage in person, because I think this is the best way when then you have a concrete example that you can share. When people ask me, what do you do? It's difficult to explain then if you don't have stories to tell. And changing the narrative is what we absolutely have to do. So it's a very positive example, and I'm really looking forward to attending the forum tomorrow.
Tell me this, what is missing in your mind from the global dialogue for women? Because when we speak about this from a business perspective, we talk about quotas and we talk about a number of women on boards. One woman feels alone, 2 women has a friend, and then 3 women can make a change. But in your mind, from a governance perspective, from a security perspective, what needs to change?
I think it's a question of the cultural change I was mentioning earlier. And it's about gender, what we call gender-responsive leadership. We focus a lot on the participation of women, but we still find resistance, cultural barriers. And sometimes women are there because government decide to do, and then speak at global level, not referring to the local situation. But at the end, there is no real willingness to integrate. So it's more a token than a reality. So I think that what we have to look is the change of mindset of who is in power today, which in the normality are men. So we have to look into what we call the gender-responsive leadership to say that to train, to dialogue with both men and women together to understand the benefit that the entire society will have if women take on more position at high level. It's not for women, it's not helping women to do something, when they say, I'm helping my wife. No, it's not about this. Because in the moment where the dynamic changes, men will benefit from this different dynamic. They will have more time for the children. They have more time even for discussion and conversation, not under the pressure. And the solution that will be found will be better solution because they will really bring the perspective of the entire society. So this topic of the gender-responsive leadership is something I advocated for and I put as a first goal of the new policy at NATO, because I think that in a male-dominated environment, while we work to increase the number of women, we have also to work with the men who are present to make sure that we can reach the same high-quality solution in a shorter time.
Bring them with us.
Yes.
Irene, it's great to have you here at Al Arabiya. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
At Al Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Al Arabiya News.
It's very impressive.
Where knowledge meets perspective.
Tokyo, the world's most populous metropolitan area with 35 million people and one of the most expensive cities, Greater Tokyo. For its crowded places and high cost of living, what makes Tokyo worth a visit? The city is teeming with history, culture, and sights. One of the most popular is the Hachiko statue, a tribute to the dog loyal to his master. Hachiko, who died of a heart infection in 1935, is regarded a national celebrity and has a bronze statue of him outside Shibuya Station in his honor. A lesser-known Disneyland also lies in Tokyo. It first opened in 1983 and would see over 13 million visitors per year, making it the third most popular theme park in the world. Also find the animation studio of Studio Ghibli Inc., often referred to as the Japanese Disney. The studio's Oscar-winning feature Spirited Away is the highest-grossing film in Japanese history. Another frequently visited site is the Imperial Palace. The palace became the official imperial residence in 1869. It remains the main residence of Japanese Emperor Akihito. For historic Shinto sites, most recommended is the Meiji Shrine in Shibuya. Shinto is Japan's dominant religion. It means the worship of the deities of heaven and earth. The Meiji Shrine is the most highly regarded of all and is an immaculate example of Japan's impressive architecture. Sporting events are also popular in Japan. The Tokyo Dome is a 55,000-seater all-weather multi-purpose home of Japan's most famous team, the Tokyo Tomiuri Giants. All over the world, Japanese food is very popular. Japanese fare is favored by many because of their incredible cooking and attention to precision and preparation. The place keeps their menu simple and delicious and is visited again and again because of its classic tonkatsu, cutlets of tender breaded pork slow cooked to perfection. When it comes to shopping, many visit Tokyo for its haven of electronics and gadgets. For Japanese fashion, visit the hip, edgier Harajuku district. Here, you'll bump into younger individuals cosplaying or adults dressed in very clean minimalist styles.
Hello and welcome, I'm Riz Khan. While the world leaders debate the future state of the oceans during the latest COP event in Azerbaijan, my guest on this episode is a remarkable young man who's already making a major positive impact on the ocean environment. The Dutch entrepreneur Boyan Slat has been a CEO for over a decade. He's devoted more than half of his life to saving the planet from plastic, and yet he only recently reached the age of 30. Boyan's non-profit company, Ocean Cleanup, has been on an ambitious mission to rid the seas and rivers of plastic since 2013. It has invented technology that's transforming the pollution of our seas and rivers, and its work is saving wildlife, fisheries, tourism, and economies. Ocean Cleanup is also preventing plastic from entering the food chain and ultimately ending up on our own plates.
We can clean up the Great Pacific Garbage Patch in 10 years' time at a cost of $7.5 billion. So that's less than half of what America is spending on Halloween decorations on an annual basis.
In a wide-ranging conversation, we discussed how achievable Boyan's mission is today. Plus, I got a glimpse inside the mind of a driven and determined young innovator who entered the record books at just 14 after experimenting with rockets and explosives. Boyan, great to have a chance to have a chat. Now, many would argue you can't put a price on having clean oceans, but you've effectively done just that. You recently revealed your assessment of how long it will take to complete your mission to remove plastic from the seas and how much it will cost. Now, people might be surprised by the numbers, so tell me what you know.
Sure, yeah. So at the current level of performance, so basically what we have already achieved to date, we can clean up the Great Pacific Garbage Patch in 10 years' time at a cost of $7.5 billion. So that's less than half of what America is spending on Halloween decorations on an annual basis. Now, so I think, it's compared to a world problem, it's something that we should be able to afford. However, we're also looking to do it even faster and even cheaper. So by improving the way we detect where the highest concentrations of plastic are inside of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, we think we can actually do it in just 5 years' time at a cost of $4 billion. So yeah, really now for the first time ever, we know what it will take to return the Pacific Ocean to its clean and pristine state.
That's a fascinating comparison, literally half of the Halloween decorations in the US. Yep. But give me this perspective, because there are always skeptics out there. Why do you see this as value for money? What else could you get for that amount?
Yeah, so I think it's important to put it in the context of not cleaning the ocean, right? And according to a study done by Deloitte a couple of years ago, the plastic pollution problem as a whole is costing humanity up to $19 billion per year. And if you take into account all the ecosystem services that the ocean is providing, you're actually looking north of $500 billion in terms of harm that the pollution is doing to our ocean every year. So if you think in terms of ROI, it's way cheaper to clean the ocean than to not clean the ocean.
Let me ask you about this, because obviously there's a trail involved. How does plastic get from the factory to the ocean?
Yes, every year humanity uses roughly 400 million tons of plastic per year. During its use, it's providing a lot of value to humanity. It's a versatile material. It's an energy efficient material as well. But unfortunately, not all of that plastic gets collected and processed in a responsible way. So you'll have essentially leakage from the system, and some of that plastic is able to end up in our waterways, so in rivers in particular, and through rivers it then ends up in the ocean. So and we're talking about quite a small fraction, so less than 0.5% of the plastic that's being used ends up in rivers and flows into the ocean. But of course, that 0.5% is able to do a tremendous amount of harm to the environment, to coastal economies, and also to humanity in terms of the potential health risks of that plastic ending up in our food chain.
Isn't that amazing? It's such a small percentage, yet so important. We'll talk more about the important role of rivers in transporting plastic waste to the sea. Give us some idea of what happens when it gets there.
So once plastic is in the ocean, actually most of it only stays in the ocean for a relatively short time. So the majority will end up back on shore, on coastlines, washes up in a matter of weeks to months. And of course, that's still not a good thing, right? Because it damages tourism. Coastlines are also important ecosystems. But effectively, most of it removes itself from the ocean in a relatively short amount of time. But some plastic is able to make its way all the way to the open ocean, where if it does, it will end up in one of the 5 gyres. So that's an area where ocean currents converge, where plastic can enter, but it can never leave. And out of those 5 oceanic gyres that exist on Earth, the largest one is in the North Pacific, and that's also the most polluted one. So more than half of the world's plastic pollution that's stuck in the ocean can be found in that one, and that's of course the infamous Great Pacific Garbage Patch.
Plastic accumulates in huge subtropic oceanic areas called gyres. Massive circular currents that trap the plastic for decades, if not centuries. There are 5 gyres in our oceans. The most polluted and best studied is the infamous Great Pacific Garbage Patch, located in the North Pacific Ocean between Hawaii and California.
It's interesting, Sarge, explain for our viewers, gyre you mean by almost like a gyroscopic swirl of water, and the Great Pacific Garbage Patch is something that I remember discussing years ago. What is it? What would you want people to know about that, and what do you remember about encountering it for the first time?
Yeah, so it's so if we take the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which is the largest accumulation of trash on Earth, this is an area that spans an area 3 times the size of France. It contains more than 100 million kilos of plastic. And what's really fascinating is when we take that plastic out and we look at the age of the plastic, we see that a lot of it is actually very old plastic, because again, once it's there to stay. It's stuck indefinitely until of course it ends up in the stomach of a fish or whatnot. But in principle, it's there to stay for a very long time. So we even see stuff dating back to the 1960s that are still. We even have had a Vietnam War drinking bottle from the U.S. Army that we found in still recognizable shape, still floating around out there in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. So that really goes to show that why we have to go out there and clean it up. Sure, of course, it's essential to prevent more plastic from entering the ocean. But if that's the only thing we do, the ocean will be polluted forever, because those ocean garbage patches, they persist, and that's why I have to go out and clean this up.
Let's go back to rivers, and you'd mentioned a little bit about rivers playing, in terms of small percentage, but quite a high role, or quite an important role in all this. What are the numbers we should know about the pollution in the rivers?
Yeah. So firstly, again, it's just a very small fraction of all the world's plastic that is being consumed that ends up in the ocean. And what's also fascinating is that those emissions are very concentrated in really just a small fraction of the world's rivers. So what we found in a study we published a few years ago is that just 1% of the world's rivers is responsible for roughly 80% of all the plastic that ends up in the ocean. So with a relatively sort of targeted intervention, intercepting the plastic in those 1% of the world's rivers, we can really stop most of the world's plastic emissions from polluting the ocean. Now, that 1% still accounts for 1,000 rivers, right? So it's still a big scope, but the good thing is that they are concentrated in a relatively small number of coastal cities, especially in middle-income countries. So Southeast Asia, West Africa, Latin America. Those are really the plastic pollution hotspots. So those are countries where there's now enough wealth to consume a lot of packaged goods wrapped in plastic. So you have a lot of waste generation, but where the infrastructure to then take care of that waste is really lacking. And just to give some more color to that, there's one river in Guatemala that we're operating in, where that one river is actually responsible for more plastic emissions to the oceans than all the developed countries combined. Just one river. So that's why we focus our work in those places where the problem is biggest, and where we can have essentially the biggest bang for our buck.
Boyan's interest, you could say obsession, with plastic waste in the seas was famously triggered by a scuba diving trip to Greece as a teenager. You'll know the expression, "I can't see the wood for the trees." Well, Boyan couldn't see the fish for the plastic bags, but he could see a problem and he had a vision to solve it. But his problem-solving appetite had begun at an even earlier age. I'd like to roll back the years and talk about the start of your incredible journey as someone who seemed, well, I guess, incredibly curious, driven and determined from a very early age. Your explorations involved explosives, launching rockets. At one point, you almost burnt down your family home.
Correct. Yeah. My mom didn't particularly like that phase. But yeah, I've always been very fascinated about technology and making things, building things, and so I've never been bored as a child, and always had my projects, right? So I had my own chemistry experiments, built my own computers. Actually, going all the way back, when I was 2, I used some wood and a hammer and nails to make my own chair. So always been had this urge to build and create. Indeed, when I was 12 or 13, I was really into some model rockets, and I decided to set a Guinness World Record by launching more than 200 of them at the same time. Again, not very useful, but it was just the way I kept myself busy. And sort of asking myself a question, what if I could do this? Could I have this idea? Could I make that happen? That's probably the thing I've always asked myself throughout my childhood, and it's also the type of question that I asked myself when I was 16 years old. When scuba diving in Greece, came across more plastic bags than fish, and I asked myself, why can't I clean this up? So I kind of see this as a continuation of my childhood.
Now, Boyan, a key moment in your journey was a TED Talk in which you laid out your ideas and it went viral. Tell me about that feedback you had from that TED Talk and the realization that there were people out there who did share your passion.
So please, don't tell me we can't clean this up together. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so at the time when I did that presentation, I was studying aerospace engineering at university here, and I had this idea. I had the opportunity to present that idea, this TEDx presentation. And a few months passed, and there wasn't really any traction. And at that point in time, I actually thought, like, okay, to give this idea any chance of success, I should probably drop out of university, dedicate all my time to this. And then again, few tough months followed. I approached 300 companies for help and sponsorship, and only one replied. And that person said, "This is a terrible idea. You should go back to school." So that was hard. But then suddenly there was some news blog that picked up the story, embedded the video of my presentation, and suddenly this blew up. And within no time, this video was watched, I think, over 1 million times, and that then allowed me to assemble an initial team, back then still volunteers, and also run a crowdfunding campaign to get the seed money to get started.
That crowdfunding campaign raised a staggering $2 million, with tens of thousands of donations from more than 150 countries. Ocean Cleanup was launched, but it would have to navigate through stormy weather on its voyage to save the seas.
It took us 8 years to finally have a system that worked. And throughout that time, we've had so many near-death experiences of almost running out of money, systems that broke down. I think we've done a few hundred prototype tests and until we had something that worked. So it's so I remember vividly. We launched that new system. It was summer 2021. We deployed in the patch, and actually the first tests, they didn't look very good. We were only collecting like a very small pile of trash, and it was just another one of those moments. Like, where did we mess up? Why is it not working again this time? And then, a few days later, we deployed the system again. We took the system back on deck. We emptied it out, and there was just this. So I woke up in the morning and I opened my phone and I see all these missed message calls and text messages. And I opened up my phone and I saw this photo of this massive mountain of plastic on deck. And that's definitely one of the biggest highlights. It's like almost like all of the pain of the 8 years was made it worth it for that brief moment when we finally knew we had a system that worked and that we could clean up the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. And by the way, it just turned out that we were in essentially sort of an empty part of the garbage patch in those first days. So we were essentially being fooled by the density of plastic. So that was a tremendous relief. And then of course we just got better and better to now the point that we can actually get the job done in just a couple of years' time.
I know you've been constantly working to improve your cleanup operation. I wonder how effective is the current system you have in contrast to your early attempts?
Yeah, so it's been a long journey to get to this point. It was 2018 when we launched our first system, which firstly didn't collect plastic, which is quite an important requirement for an ocean cleanup system. It also broke into two, which again was sort of, as we like to refer to it, as an unscheduled learning opportunity. So we learned a lot from those early days, early failures. But now fast forward to today, we have this massive 1.5 mile long cleanup system with which we can actually clean an area the size of a football field every 5 seconds. So it is, tremendously effective. Now it's really about scaling it up. So we know it can be done. We have now given humans the tool we need to clean it up. But now it's really about who is willing to make it happen and fund the expansion to a whole fleet of systems with which we then are able to clean up the whole ocean.
That's fascinating, Boyan. So literally a football pitch in 5 seconds. But I guess when you're talking of a patch 3 times the size of France, that's a lot of football pitches.
Yes, yeah, exactly. We've had one system out there for the past 3 years doing all the testing and development work. And in that time, we've swept an area roughly the size of New Jersey. So, it does add up over time, of course, but to really clean up the ocean in 5 years' time, what you're going to need is a fleet of systems, roughly 20 of them, which is and then once you have that, you can actually clean up the Great Pacific Garbage Patch.
I was blown away by when you said you'd found literally kind of old plastic, such as I think you said a plastic bottle from the Vietnam War in the garbage patch. So I wonder, what are some of the strangest things your team has recovered from the ocean?
Yeah, it's looking at our trash, it's like modern day archaeology. It's always super interesting to see what we collect. We also post these on our social media, so definitely recommend to check that out. But it's everything. It's stuff ranging from mannequins to golf balls to AstroTurf, plastic toys, dolls' houses. It's wild to see what's out there.
It might seem likely that local and national governments would support efforts towards cleaner rivers, beaches, and fisheries, but it's not always the case. What about the business world or plastic manufacturers? And what role do we have as consumers? I wanted to find out who's helping the Ocean Cleanup Project and who's not.
So when it comes to these ocean garbage patches, the issue is that it's international waters. What's interesting is that, for example, if you look at the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, we are able to link the plastic to the 5 big industrialized countries in the North Pacific. So I think there is a case to be made that they should step up and take at least some responsibility for this. When it comes to rivers, so what we do there is we put systems in those most polluting rivers to catch it before it can reach the ocean. We're currently already stopping about 2% of the emissions. We are in 16 rivers around the world and in 8 countries. But doing those first projects, it does take time to build up those relationships with governments. And I must say, I've never really felt an unwillingness to support. Governments recognize that there is this problem, and they welcome the collaboration, and we support them. And in many places, they actually operate the interceptors, so that makes it financially sustainable on the long term as well. Right. But governments are just large and bureaucratic, so they are quite slow generally, right? So getting the permits to deploy, getting the contract secured, that usually is the limiting factor in how fast we can roll out our interceptor projects.
And yet it's an international problem. So how are global institutions like the United Nations helping you tackle it?
So we do have a partnership with the United Nations Development Program, who help open doors with those national governments. I think what's quite interesting, of course, we would welcome the support of the UN, and I think especially when you talk about the ocean garbage patches, it is an international problem, and this waste just travels through many different countries and their waters, right? But what's interesting about the river problem is that you don't need any altruism, or you don't need any international cooperation to get this done, because actually the biggest victim of the pollution that flows out of Indonesia's rivers is Indonesia, right? And the biggest victim of Panama's pollution is Panama, because most of that trash will stay in those coastal waters, will wash up on shore, and therefore there's just a selfish economic reason for these countries to step up and intercept that plastic before it goes into the ocean, which I think is a good thing, because international cooperation is notoriously difficult. So I do expect governments to be much faster in adopting what we do in rivers than international waters.
Boyan, how about a little finger pointing here? How about the business world? Are the plastic manufacturers searching for solutions, or are they actually continuing to add to the problem they helped to create?
Yeah, well, so at the Ocean Cleanup, we are about solutions. We don't point fingers. But at the same time, I think, be it governments, be it plastic producers, be it the companies that use the plastic that produce the packaging, the Coca-Colas of this world, and even the users of the plastic. I think everyone has played a role in creating this problem, and therefore I think everyone also should have the opportunity to really be part of the solution. So, I think if there's any industry that has benefited from all this cheap plastic and the production of it, they are the plastic producers and the companies that use it, and therefore I do think they should play a very big role in making this cleanup happen. And actually, the interesting thing is the cost of cleaning up the world's oceans is less than 1% of the net profits of the world's plastic producing companies over the course of the cleanup. So there's no doubt that they should be able to afford it. I think it's really about are they willing to step up and grab this opportunity?
It's interesting, it's I guess a very good approach not to point fingers, because you want to coerce them, or at least to convince them to come on board. Now, I was going to say, on the other hand, there is that opportunity for green investment and sponsorship, and saving the planet can be seen as a cool thing for a business to be doing. So how well are you benefiting from that?
Yeah, no, exactly. I think, if you forcing people to do things is generally not a very successful strategy. Indeed, I'd like to turn it around and say, this is like an Apollo project for Earth, right? This is something that in 50 years from now, children will be learning about in school, and they will be learning who helped make this thing happen. So I think it's it's something you should want to be part of. It's like extremely exciting adventure, and I think there's a huge reputational and also litigation risk associated with this problem. We're learning more and more every day about the health impacts that this plastic in the environment is doing. There is the harm it's doing to countries and ecosystems. I think if these companies want to be ahead of that game, I think they should have an interest in this problem, that this problem goes away. And at least I can't think of any sort of faster and cheaper way to make the problem go away than by intercepting this plastic in rivers to prevent it from going into the ocean, and by cleaning up the legacy pollution that's already in the ocean garbage patches.
And what's really nice, Boyan, is that it's not just a Western lens that's on this. I gather Kia, the car manufacturer, South Korean, is one of those that's very keen to get involved.
That's right, yeah. So we're very proud that Kia is actually one of the first companies that have stepped up, and with whom we have a partnership of significant size, where, of course, they contribute financially to enabling our work, but they also get access to the plastic we take out of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. So there is actually some of this plastic will find its way back into the electric cars that Kia is producing. It's in our interest that our plastic doesn't. There's no risk that this stuff ends up back in the environment. So we want this to go into durable, sustainable products. And I think the Kia partnership is a great example of that. And another one is that we recently announced that the next vinyl record that Coldplay is releasing, that there will be an edition of that record that is made out of the plastic that we've taken out of rivers. So I think that's another sort of cool aspect of what we do, and it also allows us to for this story to reach more and more people.
I was wondering about that. Well, now you collected all that rubbish. What are you going to do, and how much economic value is there from recycling? And of course, I think Coldplay's been a big supporter for quite a while now as well, haven't they? And I gather you're making sunglasses, rather expensive sunglasses too.
Yeah, so we made these actually as a proof of concept. So this is 100% made out of the plastic we've collected from the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Now, we're we're not a sunglass company, right? So for us, it was really to prove to people that this is not rubbish. This is something you can actually make beautiful, useful things at. Of course, it's the economics of recycling generally are very challenging, right? It's because plastic is so cheap. It's very often cheaper to make stuff out of new plastic rather than reuse the plastic that already exists. However, of course, the thing that we add to the materials is the story value. So, Kia is willing to pay the millions for that plastic, not because they are in need of plastic, but because they want to be able to tell that story when they sell their electric cars, right? So it's so that way we think it does provide an extra way for companies that join our mission to talk about what they do with the ocean cleanup.
And it's a very powerful way as well. Now, let's ask you how we as individuals could be involved. What should we be doing to help resolve the plastic problem?
Yeah, well, I think it depends on where you live on Earth. So I think if you live in a sort of middle-income country, the issue is that waste collection is limited, and where the waste goes sometimes are illegal dumps, right? But of course it's very hard to do something about that as an individual. But of course you can make sure that at least you pay for the waste collection and that your waste gets collected rather than that you have to dump it. I think in richer countries, it's just there's not the risk that your plastic ends up in the environment, as long as you don't litter, is just so tiny that basically the best thing you can do is actually support organizations like the Ocean Cleanup to address those interventions to the places where the problem actually is happening.
The Ocean Cleanup team has encountered plenty of doubters, skeptics and critics over the years, as well as praise and prizes for its work. I was keen to know what Boyan had taken on board from that feedback and how his current work may influence his future direction as he considers looking ahead to his role as a global influencer. I understand you receive a lot of messages from schools and individuals around the world. So tell me about some of those messages that might have moved you or inspired you.
It's been humbling to receive the amount of support we've received, of course, ranging from big corporations and billionaires that give us funding all the way to the school children that write letters to us. And I think I'm a big believer in that when it comes to environmental problems in general, we're going to get out of this not by protesting or fighting against modernity, being against technology or business, etc., but rather to create solutions through which humanity can fulfill its needs and desires without having the negative side effects of destroying the environment. So I'm pro-environment, but I'm also pro-human, and I think if you're not, it's going to lead to solutions that are actually not solutions, because humanity is going to reject them, and they're just not going to work. So I think what gives me a lot of hope is to see that that I get letters from young people that that decided not to glue themselves to the street or do that sort of approach to solving problems, but actually to channel that energy in a constructive way, to start projects, to start companies, to choose a certain study through which they can become an inventor and work on new forms of energy generation, and just naming some examples. So it's so It's I think many people, there's a lot of pessimism in the world these days, especially amongst young people, and especially about the environment, and giving them hope that problems are nothing more than things that need to be solved. I think that motivates them to actually get to work on them rather than end up in despair.
How concerned are you about the effect of climate change on oceans in terms of rising tides and collapsing currents, which some people believe could actually lead to a new ice age in Europe?
Look, I think it's all about timescales, right? So I think when it comes to human timescales, I think some of these scenarios are still quite far away. But then if you look at the geological timescales, 100 years is nothing, right? And I would love to see humanity thrive, not just for the next 100 years, but for the next 100,000 years or 100 million years, right? So I think in that light, we do live, I think, in a very special slice of time where the Industrial Revolution is essentially yesterday on a geological timescale, right? And that has given us a tremendous amount of wealth, and I'm immensely grateful for those who came before me and created the modern world. But we haven't achieved technological maturity yet as a civilization. We still have the problems. We still haven't managed the side effects, when it comes to the pollution, the CO2 emissions, etc., that this modern civilization is creating. So I think I think that is a key challenge that we have in this century. And of course, if we don't solve it in this century, the longer you wait, the harder it is. So I think I don't think the world ends in 10 years. At the same time, I do think these are real problems, and I think we can solve them if we do what humanity is good at.
A lot of people would be interested to know the average age of a CEO among Fortune 500 companies is 57. Now, you came onto the scene with a bang, literally, as a teenager, and you recently turned 30, and you've already accomplished so much. So what else do you have in store for the world?
Actually, it's terrible turning 30. It's like I'm really starting to feel very old, actually. But
thanks. I'm double your age.
No offense. It's it's just it's just to me the ocean cleanup. I think plastic pollution is a huge problem, and I think it will be an immense victory for humanity if we are able to solve this problem that's literally covering 2/3 of our planet. If we can send that to the history books, I think it's going to be huge, and that's what motivates me every day. At the same time, I hope that what we do at the Ocean Clip can be essentially sort of a blueprint of how we solve problems in the 21st century. And of course, I hope that the Ocean Clip's goal is to help itself out of business. At some point in time, all these systems should be deployed, clean it up, and then at that point in time, I hope I have the opportunity to work on many other problems. There's not a shortage of ideas. It's really about having to focus now on this problem. But who knows? In a few years from now, I really hope I get to work on some other problems.
Isn't it ironic that your biggest success would be to put yourself out of business? That is interesting.
Yeah,
that you achieve it.
That's actually quite funny. Like I'm not aware of any other nonprofit that makes that explicit. While I think the majority of nonprofits, they are about solving a problem, right? So that should be their whole goal. Their whole reason to exist is to help yourself out of business. But so I really hope that more nonprofits should make that explicit.
Well, on the note of like other people getting involved, another European CEO, Spotify's Daniel Ek, has put $1 billion of his own money into a startup fund to tech moonshots. Now, how much does it excite you when you see other tech-minded entrepreneurs seeking to solve global problems?
I think it's brilliant. And what's interesting, I think philanthropy has a unique, or I think entrepreneurs have a unique role to play because they are, they tend to be quite tolerant to risk. And I think what we, to have the greatest impact, you don't want to invest in the sort of safe bets because those things will happen anyway. I think what the ocean cleanup was when we started was really a sort of high risk, high rewards opportunity where the chance of the ocean cleanup succeeding 10 years ago was super tiny. But of course, if we were to pull it off, it would have this huge impact. And I think we need more bets like that. Even if you just look at the energy problem, having very cost-effective and scalable energy storage, that's something that we don't have yet. Cost-effective ways of producing things like steel and cement in a way that doesn't cause pollution doesn't really exist yet. It's not cost-effective, at least. So I think to solve those things, what we need are those kind of bets that are sort of high risk, high rewards, and people like Daniel, they're they have an immense opportunity to support those things that governments tend not to do because it's still too early stage or too risky.
Well, a quick final thought then. Your ocean journey was triggered by the amount of plastic you saw in the sea while scuba diving in Greece. You touched on that briefly. Now, if you were to go back there today, or perhaps in 10 years, what difference do you hope or perhaps expect to see?
Yeah, I think saying about 5 to 7 years, I think all going well. And if we find the support that we need to now scale up the solutions, the solutions work, it's about scaling up now. But if we find those champions that are willing to help us make this scale, I think 5 to 7 years from now, is there any 16-year-old can go scuba diving anywhere on Earth and come across more fish than plastic bags.
Actually see the fish.
That's a future to look forward to, I think. Yeah.
Well, Boyan Slat, thank you so much. You may be the youngest guest. You are the youngest guest we've had on our show since we launched. But I think you have one of the most powerful messages. So more power to you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
The remarkable Boyan Slat. It'll be fascinating to see what he does with his next 30 years on the planet. I'm Riz Khan. From me and the team, thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.
At Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News.
It's very impressive.
Where knowledge meets perspective.
Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every weekday here on Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up on today's program, the US President-elect Donald Trump escalates his tariff threat, pledging hefty taxes on imports from Mexico, Canada and China from day one of his presidency. Well, Donald Trump's legal woes look like they're mostly behind him as a US judge agrees to drop charges against the president-elect linked to the 2020 US election. Islamabad is under strict lockdown after thousands of supporters of the former Prime Minister Imran Khan flood the streets demanding his release. Well, clashes with the police have left at least 6 people dead. And the NATO critic, Călin Georgescu's first-round presidential victory sparks fears that Romania may be set to shift towards the pro-Moscow camp. Hello and welcome to the programme. The US President-elect Donald Trump is pledging big tariffs on the United States' three largest trading partners, namely Canada, Mexico and China, where he plans to impose a 25% tariff on imports from Canada and Mexico until they clamp down on drugs and migration. Well, Beijing has responded, saying that they remain open to dialogue with the United States. Canada, meanwhile, says it is, quote, essential to the US energy supply. Well, for more, we're joined now by the Canadian-American businessman and Shark Tank investor Kevin O'Leary. Thank you very much indeed for being with us once again here on Al Arabiya News. I'm assuming you're not particularly surprised because on the campaign trail, after all, Donald Trump said that his favourite word in the English language was none other than tariffs.
I'm not surprised, actually. Security at the border is not just a Mexican-U.S. issue, it's a Canadian-U.S. issue. And for a long time in previous administrations, going back as far as the NORAD agreements, the U.S. has wanted Canada to pay its fair share, as they like to say, to secure the northern border against what was once the USSR and now Russia. So they concern themselves with tying that up. Now, in Trump's case, these tariffs are all about pre-inauguration negotiation, right? Even with NATO, just visited Miami Beach recently. All of this is positioning towards what's going to be the negotiation between Canada and the U.S. around the Mexican-Canadian deal. It's an extension of NAFTA. Most people remember it as that, but this will be the third time it's negotiated. And this is a starting position. What complicates the situation right now is Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister, had a 2-hour conversation last night with Trump. However, he's on his way out. Trudeau probably isn't going to last another 7 or 8 months. And so, unfortunately, the parliamentary system is not quite like the U.S. The end game for a prime minister that's losing a majority mandate is they just throw him out. You saw it happen in England just a few months ago. It's going to happen in Canada. And the real negotiation is going to be with the head of the Conservative Party, a man named Pierre Poilievre, who's currently a private citizen, represents the opposition, but he's the person that will take on this responsibility by the time these negotiations start and Trump is president. So it's a very delicate situation. Obviously, there's no way you can put 25% tariffs on a partner like Canada, where all the food and energy and electricity and gas and oil and paper and minerals and all that stuff flow into the U.S. And so all of this is just a pre-positioning. And it's not a big surprise to anybody. It's just this unique situation where Trudeau is lame duck and the new prime minister is not there yet.
Because that's the situation in Canada. And of course, Canada sounding extremely alarmed by the idea of a 25% tariff, saying it will have a devastating impact on workers and jobs. But it's not just in Canada that it would have a devastating impact on workers and jobs. It would also have a devastating impact on workers in the United States, wouldn't it?
Yes. You know, you have to think about all of this as not a sales tax, not a burden on the American economy at all. The real issue here, you know, sort of the 1,000-pound gorilla in the room is not Canada or Mexico or even the European countries. It's China. The U.S., in fact, Europe, I'd argue, is in an economic war with China and has been since 1999 when they came into the WTO making all these promises about playing by the rules, and they've never done that. And so IP theft, cheating, stealing, dumping of commodities in various markets, all of this has come to a head. And during the Biden administration, you know, they didn't take off the tariffs against China. It's just that Trump is now ratcheting it up to get them to the table. Most tariff deals are reciprocal. That's what the agreement between Canada, the United States, and Mexico is. It's a reciprocal tariff agreement. Same with Germany on automotives at 10%. But this China thing is going to DEFCON 1. It's getting really, really extreme. And I expect, rather than risk trade with the U.S., the supreme leader, who only gets to remain supreme if everybody's employed in China, will get over to the U.S. and try and work something out. And that's because Trump is just making it so difficult. And I don't think it's really going to affect the U.S. economy. There hasn't been much effect on tariffs at all. We've had a very strong economy at the consumer level, stock markets at all-time high. It was a lot of political rhetoric. The tariffs would ruin the economy. It just hasn't happened. And now we're going into the end game, or the beginning of the game, depending on which way you want to look at it. But I expect that this will really be all about China and will not have that much effect on the American economy.
So how come China got away with it seemingly lightly with a 10% hike in tariffs, when in fact Donald Trump had talked on the campaign trail about something a bit more like 60%, hadn't he?
Yeah. I mean, the whole presidential election is over and the country's operating as if Trump is already president. You don't see a lot of foreign leaders going to Washington. They're all showing up in Mar-a-Lago right now. So we only have 54 days left. We're going through a holiday season here in the U.S. Trump has almost picked his entire cabinet. I mean, it's incredible at the pace at which he's done this. And most people like the picks. There's a couple of controversial ones, but Trump knows he only has 24 months in which he has a majority mandate, because there are going to be midterm elections, and usually the House flips then, and you don't have as much power. So he's going to try and ram all this stuff through in the next 2 years, and he's got a mandate. He won an incredible, no other way to describe it than a landslide. I mean, he decimated the Democrats in every swing state and then some, and even won the popular vote. So he's not waiting around to debate anything with the White House or any Democrats. He's just firing up the engines, and he's going to plow right on through town.
The reason given for singling out China was relates to the drug fentanyl. And I just want to ask you whether you think that's first of all, is that the real reason? And then I also want to ask you as an extension of that question, why this is such a serious issue in the United States?
Well, fentanyl's been an issue. Opioid addiction, huge issue. Porous border, Mexico, drug cartels, murders in small American towns. All of this has made headlines in the last 4 months. But it's not just fentanyl. The dumping of commodities in the U.S. market and the lack of IP protection, spyware in the form of TikTok, scheduled to shut down January 19th at midnight, all of this is boiling and simmering just below the surface. And so, you know, this is really about how tough Trump is going to get on China. And he really wants, you know, the Canadians to make sure that once he seals off the Mexican border, Canada is not a problem. So that's what he told Trudeau last night. Trudeau won't be around to execute on that, but the message is clear to the Canadian people. It's not going to be business as usual. They're going to have to spend more money on maintaining that border and not making it porous, because there's been evidence of illegal immigration coming through the Canadian border in Quebec or in British Columbia, all of these places, and Alberta as well. That's a very big open border, so it's going to have a lot more patrolling. Luckily, there's a lot of technology, a lot of drone technology, monitoring technology, infrared technology, satellite technology. This just has to be executed by the Canadians, and it's going to be made a priority. It's all going to happen. But fentanyl is, yes, important, but just one issue. And so Trump is just taking an attitude. Border means both borders. It means Canada and it means Mexico.
Sure, and I'm just wondering, I mean, just looking at the Donald Trump lineup for his inner circle, and of course, Elon Musk is a big part of that. I mean, whether you see him having some involvement in this idea about imposing these tariffs, and also what you think he's going to bring to the table, just generally speaking, with regards to government efficiency.
Well, there's never been anything quite like Doge, if that's what you want to make reference to, because it's worth talking about. Two private citizens that have incredible executional skills, particularly in the case of what Elon Musk has achieved. He has a lot of respect within bipartisan votership. I mean, if you want to start saving money in government, it's not just a Republican or Democratic issue. And they want to talk about erasing trillions of dollars of waste. Most people know the federal government's full of waste. It's fat, it's sassy, it's never been controlled, deficits have never been higher. Nothing wrong with that. So you're getting Trump 2.0, which looks like he'll be a little bit more stable. Plus you're adding a whole dash of Doge to make the whole thing more interesting. Most people are going to cut a pretty broad swath for this administration for an extended period of time, at least 2 years, to see what they can achieve. So there's a fair amount of euphoria here in the US right now amongst business leaders. Taxes will remain stable. The regulatory environment will be stripped away. Pretty well everything Biden tried to do will be erased. That's just the nature of presidential politics. We're going to be lighting up natural gas export, LNG, almost immediately. Executive orders will become flying out of the White House on the 21st of January. A lot of change coming. And it really was two different divisions in terms of the vision for each way the country was going to be run between the Democrats and the Republicans, and the voting constituency by a landslide choice decided they would go back the Trump way of doing things. And that's just the way it is.
Yeah, and just lastly, just to wrap up this conversation, I mean, we have had a pretty decent peek behind the curtain with regards to what Trump 2.0 is going to look like. We've been talking about tariffs, we've been talking about Doge. I mean, what are your sort of forecasts? What are your predictions as to where things head to with regards to job creation and trade deficit reduction under the new Trump presidency?
Well, you can see it now. One index of the optimism is the stock market itself hitting new highs, but there's also a lot of optimism in small business in America, which represents about 62% of job creation. They're waiting to see all the regulations peeled away. The Trump picks for cabinet positions are different than Trump 1.0. Most of these people are seasoned veterans. They're going to be around for the full 4 years. It's not going to be as much volatility. Trump is thinking legacy at this point. This is definitely his last election other than the midterms, but he wants to leave the country better than he found it. Every president does. And he is building a platform within the White House that's going to be remarkably different than the last time. There was a lot of volatility, if you want to use that word. But even he has said, look, I'm not going to make the same mistakes. I'm not going to hire people that don't know what they're doing. I'm going to get veterans that understand the system. He's done that in commerce. He's done that in Treasury. Health is a little controversial with Kennedy, but I actually think Kennedy will make it through the gauntlet because he has a lot of interesting ideas about food choices, of which I'm a huge advocate of. I'm just one person. But the whole idea is 2.0 is a more seasoned Trump, a more stable Trump, a more experienced Trump with an added dash of Doge. So a little extra cleaning fluid, if you want to call it that.
Sure. And just lastly, because I said that was the last question, but I actually have one more question to you, because I think last time you came on our channel, you talked about cryptocurrency, Bitcoin approaching the 100,000 mark, sort of slowly back and forth a little bit, around the 93,000 mark today. But I'm just wondering whether you think the Trump administration, the incoming Trump administration's got grand plans to regulate, or what you think they're going to change with regards to cryptocurrency regulation.
Yeah, when I last talked to you, Bitcoin was trading around 60, and it's now around 90. So a huge increase. The optimism around settling the regulatory environment around crypto in the United States and digital payment systems. Gensler's on his way out. We're talking about getting a crypto czar. CFTC, which is the commodities regulator, has been rumored to get more power around things like, is Ethereum a commodity or a security? All these things are going to get resolved. There's a stablecoin act floating around Congress right now to make the American dollar the de facto trading system for digital currency. All of this stuff is coming in the first 24 months. And so that's why you're seeing these markets so optimistic. The granddaddy digital currency, of course, is Bitcoin. It's the one that institutions want. And as soon as it's regulated and the lawsuits go away from the exchanges, SEC is suing Coinbase, the US's largest exchange, things will settle down, and you'll find 1 to 3% allocations institutionally, which will add another $1 trillion worth of demand. And so I think crypto is probably a pretty good bet. And certainly within our portfolios, we've added to it, and we're doing some rebalancing because no one saw this increase in such a short period of time with Bitcoin. I mean, if your mandate is you're only allowed to have 20% in crypto and no more than 5% in any one position, you've blown out the walls with what's occurred with Bitcoin. So we have had to do some rebalancing, but that's why you see the price peel back a little bit. I'm not the only person in that situation. It's happening all around the world.
Okay, well, that really was the last question. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us once again here. Kevin O'Leary, thank you.
Take care. Thank you.
Well, the US President-elect Donald Trump's tariff threats against Canada, Mexico and China have shaken up the currency markets. The dollar jumped as much as 2.3% against the Mexican peso. It rose 0.7% against the Canadian dollar, and on the Chinese side, the yuan was up just by 0.1% in offshore trading. Well, let's get some more analysis now. We can speak to Ambassador John Verano, who was a trade negotiator under President George W. Bush. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Obviously, tariffs are one way of the US defending its economy, but it also has implications for US consumers, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely. The evidence suggests, and many studies have been done that show that consumers, U.S. consumers, are paying a large portion of the tariffs that were put in place since 2018.
So what you're saying is that companies would typically pass on this additional cost to consumers by simply raising prices?
Yes, it can vary depending on the leverage between the importer and the exporter, of course. But for the most part, U.S. consumers are paying for these tariffs.
And just casting our minds back to the year 2018, when Donald Trump was last in office, and there were more tariffs during that administration. I mean, what happened then? Were there retaliatory tariffs put in place against the United States?
Yes, every action has a reaction, of course. So when the U.S. put tariffs in place, other countries, including China, put tariffs in place in response to that. And I would expect the same reaction this time from our trading partners.
But back then, did they have a detrimental effect, those retaliatory tariffs, on U.S. exporters, on job creation? What was the fallout?
Yeah, the economic studies have shown that U.S. exports were hurt in various markets. The U.S. Put in place a special subsidy program to help U.S. soybean farmers, for instance, who lost market share in China. So these interventions through tariffs have tremendous knock-on effects throughout the economy, which is why, at least until recent years, there was a tremendous effort over the previous 80 years to reduce, if not eliminate, tariffs. So they have a lot of knock-on effects throughout the economy.
And in terms of achieving the desired effect, which according to the Trump administration is to crack down on drugs and illegal migration, do you think they're likely to work this time?
Well, illegal drugs and illegal immigration are very complex problems. I think the president-elect is correct to want to reduce illegal flows across the border of both, but there's also a demand side of that problem of drugs, and I would like to see the president-elect announce what he plans to do to help reduce demand among U.S. users and help those who are addicted to these drugs, in addition to efforts to try to stem the flow across borders. But addressing only the supply side has proven over time not to be sufficient. You definitely have to address the demand side. And then secondly, there's a question of whether tariffs are the appropriate tool to be using to address these problems. Historically, trade agreements have been about trade and trade alone, and have not included these other issues, however important they are, but there are other channels and other remedies available to the government, and to work with other governments to address those that should be used instead of tariffs as the only solution. But as the president-elect likes to describe himself as tariff man, tariffs is his immediate go-to tool for any sort of problem.
Okay, so let's just look at this from the point of view of who comes off worst. A 25% tariff on all products that enter the United States from Mexico and Canada. Obviously, this is going to have a knock-on effect. We've talked about tit-for-tat tariffs. Who comes off worse out of this, the United States or Mexico and Canada?
Well, I think it's hard to say. I think both are losers, you know, at a time when, you know, the president-elect won in no small part because of his focus on inflation and U.S. voters' concerns about inflation. Even though inflation rates have declined, prices are much higher now. And now we're going to see 25% increase in a lot of lumber products, for instance, from Canada that are used in U.S. housing. So I think Canadian exporters will suffer, and U.S. consumers and home buyers will suffer.
But do you think any of this is actually really going to happen? Or do you think this is part of a negotiating technique, some posturing ahead of some talks on how perhaps trading arrangements can be changed? What do you think the strategy is here?
Well, I think we'll see both. I mean, some of it is no doubt a negotiation, but I do believe that the president-elect believes tariffs are good for America. So I don't think it is purely a negotiating tactic, although that's part of it. But negotiations have to be successful, and in order to eliminate these tariffs, if it is an opening gambit. And countries, frankly, don't like to be bullied. And when they're, I think there are problems that are at the borders with Mexico and Canada that can be solved and should be solved. But I'm not sure that it sets the correct tone for negotiations if you start with announcing on social media plans to take unilateral action of this magnitude.
And obviously, lots of countries have reacted to this news. Well, in particular, Canada, Mexico, and China, the countries concerned. I mean, what struck you about the sort of reaction that we've heard from them? Do you get the impression that, from what they're saying, these tariffs might have the desired effect, whatever that may be?
Well, these are complex problems of, you know, illegal drug importation and illegal immigration in the U.S. These are very complex problems that people have been working on for a long time. So redoubling those efforts, I think, is a very good thing. But I think to the extent that tariffs will stay in place until these complex problems are solved, would suggest that these tariffs are going to be in place for a long time, because these are vexing problems that have been around and will continue to be around. But as far as the initial reaction from both Canada and Mexico and their trade officials and government officials, I think, you know, they are understandable. They're trying to be, you know, restrained in their response, given the stakes. And they are trying, I think, at least in their initial statements, to temper their, at least the public discussion of these, although I suspect in private there must be great dislike of the approach that has been taken in this unilateral faction.
You're quoted in the Washington Post today as saying the following: when the United States imposes import taxes on foreign goods, other countries will hit back. We've talked a bit about retaliatory tariffs already, but do you think we are here on the brink of a full-blown trade war?
Well, I don't know. Obviously, I hope not, but every action has a reaction, and negotiations, everyone likes to negotiate from a position of strength, That's understandable. That's good negotiating tactics. But no one likes to be bullied either. So you could see, a mood among negotiators among the countries where it's a very unwelcoming and challenging environment to reach a negotiation, because neither side feels they have the space to agree to something without looking domestically like they were bullied into something. And in China, for instance, there's a history of the Opium Wars, and I'm sure it's not lost on some Chinese that they are being now threatened with these tariffs in response to an illegal drug use at a time when many in China still remember the Opium Wars, where their ports were bombed because they would not accept opium from Western sources.
And obviously looking at China in the year 2024 with this threat of a 10% additional tariff being placed on the country. I mean, it's not 100% clear, is it, what President-elect Donald Trump has in mind with regards to this additional 10%. I mean, what do you think his options are?
Well, in the campaign, as you know, he threatened tariffs of up to 60%. So I think some reaction to the 10% may be welcome news that 10 is better than 60%. But I think that would be it would be imprudent to assume that this is the end of the threats of increases to tariffs on goods from China.
Again, of course, the Chinese embassy in Washington hitting out about these latest tariffs. They say that there will be losers on all sides if there is a trade war. Are they right?
Yes, absolutely. It's why the Bretton Woods agreements in World War II, following World War II, there was great effort through the WTO and bilateral efforts to reduce tariffs, because they have proven to be very unhelpful interventions in the economy that ultimately hurt consumers, especially low-income consumers, and create opportunities for crony capitalism where friends of the government in power get special dispensation and relief from tariffs, and others who are less politically favored are hurt. So the record is quite clear that these tariff interventions at the end of the day are far more hurtful than helpful.
And just lastly, as I mentioned at the beginning, you were a trade negotiator under President George W. Bush. How unprecedented is all of this, the imposition of tariffs or the threat of tariffs at the beginning of a presidential term? Or is this part of the political cycle? Is this just the sort of thing that world leaders do to sort of make their mark when they take up the reins of power? What are your thoughts?
Well, nothing is new under the sun. So there have been periods, at least in the U.S., which I'm more familiar with our own history, is, turn of the century, 1900s, there were very steep tariffs. There was a belief that tariffs were good, but that was proven through years and years of evidence that they're not helpful. They are helpful to a minority of companies that are politically favored, but harmful to the vast majority of consumers and the vast majority of other producers who don't enjoy political favoritism. So this is not new, but it's been about 100 years since these notions that tariffs are a good thing have been in the minds of those in power. So it's not new, and I suspect we will relearn old lessons of history, but that seems to be the nature of the human project.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed. We really appreciate your time today, Ambassador John Verano. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Meanwhile, Donald Trump's legal woes, or at least most of them, will not be following him back to the White House. Well, Trump was accused of conspiring to overturn the results of the 2020 election when he lost to President Joe Biden. He was also accused of removing large quantities of top-secret documents after he left the White House. Well, the court's decision is based on the US Department of Justice policy that stipulates that a sitting president cannot be tried or jailed whilst in office. Well, Trump took to X to respond to the charges being dropped. This is what he had to say. These cases, like all the other cases I've been forced to go through, are empty and lawless and should never have been brought. Over $100 million of taxpayer money has been wasted in the Democratic Party's fight against their political opponent, me. Well, Donald Trump is still battling two cases brought by state prosecutors in New York and Georgia. He was convicted in New York in May of 34 counts of falsifying business records to cover up a hush money payment to an adult star, Stormy Daniels. Well, Trump was scheduled to be sentenced in July, but his lawyers asked that his conviction be thrown out in light of the Supreme Court immunity ruling. Well, in Georgia, he faces racketeering charges over his efforts to subvert the 2020 results in the southern state. Well, for more, I'm joined now by Alan Dershowitz, Professor Emeritus at Harvard University and former attorney to Donald Trump. Thank you very much indeed for being with us, Professor. It seems that most of Donald Trump's legal woes will not be following him to the White House. What's your reaction to this?
Well, they led him to the White House. I think many of the cases that were brought against Donald Trump contributed to his victory in November. The American public was sick and tired of this misuse of lawfare against him. They understood that these were politicized prosecutions, and I think that garnered him some votes. He will go to the White House without any federal cases pending against him. There are still two state cases, one in Georgia where the prosecutor herself is under serious cloud because of perjury she may have committed with her lover, who she appointed to investigate and prosecute the case. And then there's the New York case where the prosecutor said, well, maybe we should delay sentencing for 4 years. That's not going to work. So I really think that Trump's legal woes are over, and he can go on to try to govern without any impact from this lawfare that was declared against him literally the day he announced for president.
And supposing he hadn't won the election, I mean, a slightly difficult question to answer, a bit of a what-if question here, but how serious would the legal situation he'd been in prior to the fact that it became obvious he'd won the election, how serious would that have been for him?
Well, it's a good question, and it would be very serious. The Washington, D.C. case involving election interference on January 6th was going forward in front of a judge who was very, very inclined against him. So it's very likely he would have been convicted of a serious federal offense. I think it probably would have been reversed on appeal, but he would have gone ahead, at least for the next few months, with a conviction, a federal conviction hanging over his shoulder. The New York conviction doesn't really count because nobody can figure out what the crime was, paying hush money and not disclosing it on a form. That didn't seem like a serious crime. But the January 6th crime was serious and could have resulted in literally an imprisonment if he had not been elected.
Indeed. I mean, there are these four criminal charges that linger over the president-elect still. Of all of them, I just want to get your assessment, which one you think is the most serious and the one that perhaps could come back to haunt him after he leaves office?
Well, the one that is most compelling, the evidence is most compelling, but not serious, is the classified material. It's an open and shut case. He held up a piece of paper that was classified, showed it to a journalist and said, I should have declassified this, I didn't. It was an open and shut case. But many former presidents and office holders have shown classified material to friends or biographers or journalists. So that was the case that would have been the easiest to win, but it wasn't all that serious. The case involving January 6th would have been the hardest to win, but if they had won it, it would have been very, very serious.
And of course, there's the option, isn't there, of Donald Trump becoming president again and then pardoning himself before he leaves the White House, isn't there?
He won't pardon himself. He doesn't have to at this point. I think the real question is, will he pardon Hunter Biden? I think he should, because Hunter Biden's conviction is also lawfare. It was based on his name and his relationship with President Biden. Nobody is prosecuted for failing to disclose a drug problem on a gun permit or for taxes when he's paid all the taxes back. That too is selective prosecution. So I think we may see a pardon there. We may see pardons of some of the January 6th nonviolent offenders. What we won't see is a pardon of Donald Trump himself, because he doesn't have to, and it would be politically costly, and some would take it as an admission of guilt. So it's not going to happen.
You've been a lawyer and a law professor for 60 years now, I gather. And back in May, you wrote a piece in the New York Post in which you said, of all the cases you've ever seen, and they were in countries like China, Ukraine, Italy, Israel, you said you'd never seen anything quite like what you saw in the courthouse in New York when you were sitting in the front row there. And I'm just wondering why you thought it was such an unprecedented scene.
Yeah, I've seen it all. You know, I represented Natan Sharansky in front of Soviet courts. I represented the former president of Ukraine, Kuchma. I've seen it all, and I've never seen anything like the New York case because they just made it up. There was no case, and the judge acted like a tyrant. When a particular witness, a lawyer, wanted to testify for Trump, and he looked at the judge in a funny way, the judge yelled at him as if it was in a movie, saying, "You talking to me? You looking at me?" It was bizarre. I've never seen anything quite like that. And I'm confident that the New York courts will ultimately reverse that conviction. And if not the New York courts, the United States Supreme Court. It was an abomination. And the prosecutor wants to prevent it from being reversed by putting the sentence off for 4 years, because under New York law, you can't appeal a conviction until there's a sentence. So it continues to be a perverse misapplication of lawfare.
So Donald Trump goes back to the White House in January. He is, of course, a convicted felon by, as far as the law is concerned. But in terms of his standing as president, has any of this damaged him, would you say, long term? Or would you say that apart from the label, which will only be used by people that oppose him, he's walked away from all of his legal woes more or less unscathed?
Not only unscathed, but perhaps even benefiting from some of the overreach of lawfare. I don't think he'll be hurt. Now, when he travels around the world, some media will say, oh, here he is. There's a jury verdict hanging over his head. By the way, there is not a conviction. Technically, the conviction doesn't occur until sentencing, and there won't be any sentencing in this case, I believe, until after he leaves office, if it happens at all. So I think he travels the world unscathed. He will be attacked by academics, by people on the hard left. But I think that the legal issues are behind him, unless he does more things. And, you know, he is capable of confronting legal issues again. I hope he won't. I think he won't. I hope if he thinks about it, he'll seek my advice, and I will advise him to stay very far away from any line of criminality, which I think he would be inclined to do anyway. I think he's going to govern for the next 4 years without the imprimatur of a criminal verdict hanging over his head. I think that really is over, and I wish him well. And I hope he will have a good 4 years and maybe even bring about peace in Ukraine, in the Middle East. He's capable of doing that with his extraordinary ability to make deals. Now, deals are never perfect. Nobody loves the result of a deal because they're compromises, but he has the ability to bring that off.
Indeed, and that's a recurrent theme on this channel when we talk to guests about what we think Trump is going to bring to the table with regards to situations like the ones you described around the world. Just to be clear, for the benefit of our viewers who might not know your full profile, you're not a Trump supporter, are you? Did you vote for him?
I don't tell anybody who I voted for. I did not endorse him. I did announce that I voted against him in 2016 because I was a very public supporter of Hillary Clinton, but I've never been a political supporter of Donald Trump. But I did defend him against an unconstitutional impeachment back in 2020, 2021. And that led many people to think that I was a political supporter. But, you know, in America, a lawyer can defend somebody who he doesn't agree with. I've defended many people I disagree with in every way. but I've also defended President Clinton. I defended many people I do agree with. So I don't disclose, I'm not going to disclose my vote in this election, but I did not endorse either candidate in this election.
And Professor, Donald Trump says $100 million of public money has been wasted on all of these cases. It sounds like you agree with him. He's also pledged to use the Justice Department to go after his political enemies. So do you think Donald Trump is likely to be in retribution mode when he takes office in January?
I hope not. I hope he's in justice mode. There has to be some accountability for some of these excesses. For example, there's a group of lawyers who are trying to disbar every lawyer who ever defended Donald Trump, including me. They will fail, but they have to be held into account. And I think the lawyer in New York, the prosecutor who brought this absurd case against him, should be held to account. And I think congressional hearings will be held. By the way, the same thing will be true of the International Criminal Court. I believe the International Criminal Court will be the subject of possible sanctions and hearings about why they decided not to go after Syria, not to go after Iran, not to go after real committers of genocide, but to go after democratically elected leaders of Israel. That too will be brought in front of congressional hearings. So I think we will see criticism of the ICC in this administration as well.
And just lastly, Professor, I mean, obviously, going back to Donald Trump, I mean, he will go back to the White House as a twice impeached, convicted felon. But I'm just wondering whether you think what this tells us about the future of US politics and how many precedents, to what extent precedents are being set here, and whether this is the face of things to come, mudslinging and political, or as some would say, politicized legal showdowns really dominating the news agenda.
I'm afraid it's going to happen unless there's some accountability. I'd love to see a ceasefire in the warfare that's going on in the United States. I'd love to see Trump announce that he's going to pardon Biden, he's going to pardon some of the January 6 people, and declare the end of warfare on all sides. That would be great for America. It would be great for encouraging politicians to go into run for high office. But I'm afraid unless something is done, we're going to see a continued increase in the misuses of lawfare.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Professor Alan Dershowitz, thank you very much indeed.
Yeah.
Now, turning our eye to Islamabad, where tear gas filled the streets today. This as the authorities clash with protesters demanding the release of the former Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan. Well, ousted in 2022 by a no-confidence vote, Khan has since led a campaign against the government, accusing it of colluding with the military to remove him. Well, the former cricketer turned politician has been jailed for over a year, facing multiple charges, all of which he denies. Well, according to the local authorities, the clashes in the capital, Islamabad, have left at least 6 people dead. Well, let's get more now, and we can speak to Rauf Hassan, who is the former special assistant to the Prime Minister and spokesperson for the former Prime Minister Imran Khan, who joins us from Islamabad. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Sure.
Let's start by talking about these deadly clashes close to the Pakistani parliament. People there calling for Prime Minister Imran Khan to be released from prison, and there's a sit-in outside Parliament, and they say they won't leave until their demands are met. Just tell us what the demands are.
Well, there are 3 demands, basically. Number 1 is release of all political prisoners, which have been illegally and unconstitutionally incarcerated for over a year now. Then we want the reversal of the mandate of 8th of February. And third is that we want the 26th constitutional amendment to be annulled. These are the 3 demands that we put across to the government.
Okay, and Imran Khan's wife, Bushra Bibi, is pretty vocal and very much flying the flag for her husband. She's been calling for peaceful protests, but it doesn't look like they've been at all peaceful, have they?
Well, we definitely intended to launch a peaceful movement, and it has been a peaceful movement, till this moment in time as we speak. Unfortunately, the deaths occurred because 4 people, 3 from the Rangers and 1 from the military, they were overrun by their own truck. because they ran out of ammunition and they wanted to rush away from the people in the process, their vehicle overran 4 people. And they died on the spot, basically. One policeman was injured, and he later succumbed to injuries. I'm not aware of the 6th death, I am aware of 5 deaths, so far. Very unfortunate. Were very unfortunate, but they were none of that was the doing of the party, as I have explained to you.
Yeah, I mean, some people have arrived for these protests carrying metal bars and slingshots. That's according to reporters who are on the ground, that we can't independently verify that. They've then gone on to break through security barriers. I mean, do you condemn the violence?
Well, absolutely. We condemn the violence, and as a matter of fact, we've already done so. Well, we are not carrying any ammunition at all. I see you must have heard about the kind of lockdown, which the country has been placed under, and virtually, every street, every motorway, every expressway, every nook and corner, has been blocked, with containers, in the hundreds of thousands, So this kind of lockdown has never been witnessed before. But in spite of that, we have remained peaceful, and we intend to remain peaceful. Now we have arrived at the venue where we intended to protest, which is the D Chowk, next to the parliament, in front of the parliament, and we intend to stay there. We are peaceful. We absolutely want to remain peaceful, and we expect that the other party shall also remain peaceful.
Well, then you must disagree with the current Prime Minister, Shehbaz Sharif, who says this is not a peaceful protest, it's extremism, he said. What do you say to that?
Well, Tom, I would like to take you back to when Khan's government was dismissed, and all that our party has gone through, and coming from the current Prime Minister, who is both unconstitutional and illegal because, he lost the elections, but they stole the elections, in the thick of the night. What they have made the party go through, our people abducted, our people tortured, they're forced to convert their loyalties and then forgiven, and those who did not convert their loyalties, they had to go through harrowing times. And some of them have still not come out. They're still technically forcibly disappeared people. And, in addition to that, we have not been given permissions, to stage our peaceful protests, which are enshrined in the Constitution. That's our inalienable right. And not even once, that permission has been granted by the district administration, while every other political party, can stage a protest as and when it wants to. PTI, Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, has been made an exception, and we are not supposed to protest. We are not permitted to protest. So this was the only way that we could have done it now, because it's now 2.25 years, since we were ousted, and we have not been heard in the parliament. We have not been heard on the judicial front. We have been seeking justice. Unfortunately, that is in this country. When there's no constitution, there's no rule of law, there is no respect for human rights. So in a situation like this, this is tailor-made. This statement coming from the Prime Minister, unfortunately, it just amazes me. It just amazes me. That's all I can say.
And in terms of where things head to from here, are you getting any signs that the government is looking at all vulnerable at this stage?
Well, the kind of people, who have gathered at D Chowk this evening, and there are more contingents coming, from across Punjab. So this number is going to swell further. Obviously, it is a source of pressure, but we hope that we have been in touch with the establishment, and we hope that we shall be able to soon sit across the table and talk to them in a manner, that we want to resolve this crisis. The prospect of us backing off, is absolutely not there. I think, when you're not given justice, at the available fora, then unfortunately, this kind of protest remains the only option with the political force. And this is what we've resorted to. This is peaceful, and we will make sure that it remains peaceful. But we also hope that the other side, would respect that, would remain peaceful, in their own right. There have been threats, coming from various officials of the government, even the Interior Minister, yesterday said, that if I ask the Rangers to shoot, then nobody will be able to stay there for more than 5 minutes, And there have been instances, in the last 24 to 48 hours, when rubber bullets have been fired directly at people, And I'm sure you must have seen them on the social media. Lots of people, with deep wounds on their body parts, they're displayed on the social media. So, if there has been any violence, that unfortunately has come from the government side, not from the side of the PTI.
You say you would like to see talks take place. How far off are we from a stage at which you and others sit across the table from each other and negotiate?
Well, there has been contact and there has been talks, in the last 5-6 days, Even yesterday, throughout the day, there was activity in the sense, that the government was pressurizing us, to change the venue of our protest. They wanted to give us a place called Sanjarani, which is about 30 kilometers out of Islamabad. And, they wanted, for a decision in that respect, we had to go to Imran Khan. So there were 2 visits, which were organized, Otherwise, we are not even allowed to meet him. There were 2 special visits organized, for our representatives to be able to meet Khan Sahab. Well, he said, no, I'm not changing. I'm not shifting the venue of protest, So he stuck to D-Chalk, Consequently, here we are. Last night, orders were passed, by the party leadership, that, in the morning we have to move to the coveted destination. And yes, we have arrived there. And we hope that the contact, that has been established in the last 4 or 5 days, that shall continue and that we shall be able to sit across the table to engage in a meaningful dialogue, because that ultimately is the only way to resolve the crises, this country faces. Khan Sahab, in his speech about 5 or 6 days ago, is talking to the media after a case was heard, at the jail premises. He also said, that ultimately we will have to sit down and talk about these matters. So I reiterate the fact, that we are ready to talk and that we, in fact, are eager to talk. So I hope that the other party responds in this regard at the earliest possible, so that this crisis can be resolved without any unwanted, undesirable delay.
And of course, the protesters are demanding that Imran Khan be released from prison. And just for the benefit of our viewers, really, he faces 60 cases that range from corruption to the instigation of violence, so a wide range of cases. And I'm just wondering how you sit down and talk and how you negotiate a deal of some sort without making a total mockery of the justice system.
Well, the justice system has made a mockery of itself over the last 2.25 years. Unfortunately, the history of the judicial system in Pakistan has not been a proud one. And I've often written on the subject, with facts and data, which can be tracked, we're just typing my name out. The fact is that, all we want basically is that the constitution and rule of law should be restored in the country. If you just want me to confine it to one, I would say restore the constitution, because everything else flows from the constitution. In the last 2.25 years, there has been scant respect paid to the constitution. There has been no rule of law, and there has been grave violations of human rights in this country. So what we want basically is restoration of the constitution. Once that is done, then I think everything else will flow from it. But this 26th constitutional amendment is a travesty because it establishes a parallel judicial system in Pakistan. And that is meant to enable the government, to select the judges of their choice, to have benches of their liking made, and then consequently get judgments, of their own liking. And that is that totally, because we believe in trichotomy of powers. There is the legislature, there is the executive, and there is the judiciary. Judiciary is it's possibly the most important of the 3 pillars, and that has been totally demolished. Unfortunately, this country now stands on 2 pillars, and it's wobbly. And we have to restore the sanctity of the constitution. We have to restore the sanctity of the judiciary. And that is what the struggle is all about. If the constitution is restored, then everything else will flow from it. And that is what we want. We stand, and we have remained steadfast, because our leader does not want to compromise on that.
Realistically speaking, how long do you think it'll be before, or do you think it will happen, that Imran Khan walks free?
Well, Imran Khan should have been a free person about a week ago when he was bailed out. In the last of the cases, Toshakhana 2 it is known as. So unfortunately, he was not released. And as a matter of fact, another frivolous case was registered against him about an incident on 23rd of September. When Khan was in jail, he was not even out to be responsible for any such thing. So they booked him in that. Consequently, they did not release him, although he should have, technically speaking, he should have been released about a week ago when he was bailed out, in the Toshakhana 2 case. So the intent has been, to keep him incarcerated, not let him out. And they have seen today that even when he's not out, he has the potential to gather unbelievably large crowds, which no other leader in Pakistan has ever done. So after the Qaid, he possibly is the only leader who has this capacity to get as many people out as he may want to. So I think, while this will drive some element of fear down their spine, it should also wake them up, to the reality on ground. That he's an established leader, not just in Pakistan, but throughout the world. You must have seen the kind of coverage that he received yesterday. You must have seen the kind of letters, which are being written in the UK, in the US, in the EU, and virtually every country of the world. You must have seen gatherings in every Western capital yesterday, 36 of them. People gathered in hundreds of thousands to protest in favor of releasing Imran Khan. So, such is his charisma, such as the iconic figure that Khan is. Consequently, to keep him incarcerated, is doing a disservice to this country. So let him come out. Yeah. And I think that will pave the way for other negotiations and other things which are on the table, to be negotiated, to be discussed and to be settled. But the first and foremost requirement is that Khan and all his compatriots, who have been illegally and unconstitutionally incarcerated for over a year now, they should be released without any ado.
I mean, you anticipated my next question, because, 72-year-old Imran Khan remains, as you've been saying, hugely popular. He's extremely recognizable internationally. And I just wanted to ask you how you explain his enduring popularity there in Pakistan.
Well, Tom, I'll have to go into a bit of history on that. Unfortunately, in the past 76 years that we have been a so-called independent country, we actually have not been an independent country because we have remained subservient to our foreign masters, one way or the other. That has been a very unfortunate feature, And for the first time after the death of the founder of the country, Qaid-e-Azam, here is a leader basically who wants to make Pakistan genuinely independent, And I think during his tenure as the Prime Minister, he initiated some extremely delayed, steps, which were important, to establish that genuine independence. And unfortunately, some powers were not happy with it, and that led to a collaboration between them and the domestic actors, and he was ousted. But he has remained steadfast. He has not compromised. Let me assure you that he could have been freed within about a week of his arrest about a year and a quarter ago. But he refused to cut a deal. Okay. He said, "I stand for democracy. I stand for rule of law. I stand for human rights, and I shall not compromise on that. I'm not going to leave this country. I'm going to stay here, and you can keep me in for the next 5 years, 10 years. I'm not compromising." And this kind of resolve, this kind of character, this kind of integrity, this kind of such other things basically totally unseen and unheard in this country. Unfortunately, all leaderships have been compromised, they have been grossly compromised, they've all cut deals, whenever they were kicked out, they cut deals and they left the country. Look at Sharif, stayed in Saudi Arabia for 6-7 years. The Zardaris and the Bhuttos, they also left the country, He's the first leader who has remained steadfast to his ideals, to his dreams, to his passion. And that is what has endeared him.
Mr. Hassan, we're coming to the end of this interview. I just wanted to ask you very quickly, though, before we finish. I noticed that you have congratulated Donald Trump on his second presidential term. You put out a message on X, formerly known as Twitter. I just want to ask you what difference you think his presidency is going to mean for relations between Islamabad and Washington, and specifically regarding the fate of Imran Khan.
Two things I would like to see. If you look at the history of the US-Pakistan relations, our relations with the US have been considerably better during the Republican era than during the Democratic era. This is the history tells us that. So we expect for improved relations, when Trump takes over. Then too, when Imran Khan during his tenure as the Prime Minister went to visit the US, I think he cut a personal equation with Trump, with then President Trump, and I think that friendship is going to sort of hold him in good stead. So we look at improved relations with US on the one hand, and we also look at a greater engagement on the part of the US, to restore the constitution and human rights in Pakistan. These are the two factors, that I highlighted, in my tweet, and so many other people from the party also tweeted on the re-election of President Trump.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed for your time, Rauf Hassan. Thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Now to an unexpected turn of events in Romania, where Călin Georgescu, a staunch NATO critic who has praised Russia, is leading the country's presidential race after securing 22.9% of the vote in the first round. Well, this marks the first time in Romania's 35-year post-communist history that the Social Democratic Party, the PSD, that's the country's dominant party, has failed to present a candidate in a runoff, which is set to be held on the 8th of December. Well, Georgescu, a far-right independent, has sparked controversy for praising Romania's fascist and nationalist leaders from the 1930s and 40s as national heroes. Well, he's also a TikTok star with more than 3.7 million likes on his account. And while Georgescu claims not to be pro-Russian, he has referred to Ukraine as, quote, an invented state. Well, if he wins, how will it reshape Romania's political landscape? Well, to find out more, we're joined now by Iulia Joja, who is a former advisor to the Romanian president, Traian Băsescu, also a former deputy project manager at NATO Allied Command Transformation, and the director of the Middle East Institute's Black Sea program. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Dr. Joja. What went through your mind when you heard the news that the hard-right politician Călin Georgescu had won the first round of the presidential race?
Hi, and thanks for having me. It's been indeed a shock and a surprise, not just at the international level, but nationally too. And of course, I was watching the elections as he was getting boosts in the election results hour by hour. And I think the main reason why this was such a big surprise was that in the polling that was done on a daily basis by several companies within the country, either by political parties or independent polling, it didn't quite reflect his ascendance, Georgescu's ascendance. He started off with 3%, then he went to 5%, and just the poll on the day before the elections was showing that he could make it to the second round. But as elections were taking place on Sunday, voting intention modified too by 1%, 2%, 3% during the course of the day. So that means that his ascendance is incredible and unprecedented, not just in Romania, but what we've seen across the West and in the region particularly. And that's been the big surprise. He himself is not necessarily a big surprise. He's not a well-known figure at the national level, but in foreign policy circles, Romania is not a big country. He's been well-known. He's been proposed as prime minister more than 3-4 times over the last decade. So within foreign policy circles, he's actually quite known.
Okay, I mean, you say this is all rather incredible and that he completely defied the pollsters. As you're saying that, are you saying that the election was free and fair at the same time, or are you suggesting that perhaps there was some external interference in all of this?
Well, we don't know that for sure, but what we do know is that TikTok played a big role in his campaign, and that's what it seems propagated him from a candidate that again had no political backing. No, he ran as independent to someone scoring with a distance as #1 in the first round of elections. And that's been due to TikTok. TikTok remains the most intransparent social media platform. And it seems like journalistic investigations are ongoing as we speak over the last few days since the election results. It seems that he's gotten significant help, which means IT, tech help on the TikTok platform, which enabled his incredible rise over the past week just before the elections, reflected as such barely in the polling. So we know that he owes his rise to TikTok and to social media. He's been on social media active for the past few years. He was in the far-right party as their proposal 4 years ago in the previous legislative elections, parliamentary elections in Romania. But he was, after he was proposed as prime minister within that far-right party, as he was known online and on social media platforms active, he was kicked out of the party for being too far right. ultra-nationalistic. And ever since, he's been building his profile, again, on social media platforms, but specifically TikTok is what he has used, and TikTok is what Romanians have consumed, both inside the country that voted for him, as well as in the Western European diaspora, where he scored with sometimes even over 50%, such as in Germany.
Okay, so let's look forward to what happens next. In 12 days from now, Romanians will go to the polls again for round 2. Of course, Georgescu is one of the candidates. The other candidate is the centrist Elena Lasconi. Can she pull it off, do you think?
I think so. I think it's right now, she is portraying this as, for legitimate reasons, for a fight between democracy and authoritarian tendencies, and for the Romanians as a referendum between a Western orientation, staying within the European Union, staying within NATO, being a staunch supporter of Ukraine, being a staunch supporter of the West, and increasing Romania's role within these institutions, which is what a big part of Romanians want for prosperity and for security. They associate the European Union with prosperity and NATO with security, especially with a war waging on next door, versus him who is openly pro-Russian, who openly doubts support for Ukraine, openly doubts NATO. And so this seems to be, in the next 12 days or so, to become an informal, if you'd like, political referendum between two extremes, if you'd like, when it comes to foreign policy orientation. But the interesting thing is what the two have in common is the fact that they are portraying themselves as being out of the system. As you've introduced the topic a couple of minutes ago, it's the first time that mainstream parties have not made it to the second round of presidential elections, and that they're scoring record low compared to the last 35 years. And that's because Romanians, both at home and abroad, are upset. They perceive the mainstream parties as arrogant and as having mismanaged the country. And so either way, whoever will become president in less than 2 weeks, it's going to be someone who is portraying themselves as being outside of the system. The only nuance here is that Mr. Georgescu is portraying himself as being out of the system and ultra-nationalistic. The problem is that he has very close ties to the system. He has been a high-level employee of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, of the Ministry of Ecology. He is closely associated with people from the Romanian Academy, so all establishment organizations. And as journalistic investigations are starting to dig into this, we will see how Romanian voters feel about the fact that they voted for him as being out of the system or against the system, and then it turns out that he's closer than many people thought.
Yeah, I mean, I was reading your feed on X, in which you said the outcome of Sunday's election was, quote, a punishment for the mainstream parties for their arrogance and mismanagement. I just want to look forward to what happens next. I mean, let's imagine a scenario in 12 days from now where it becomes clear that Georgescu has won and he becomes the president. How much power does the president of Romania actually wield vis-a-vis, for example, the prime minister?
Yeah, it's a complicated question. There's been a lot of political infighting over the years in that, and I was indirectly part of that when I was working at the presidency over a decade ago. According to the Constitution, the president is the one that decides the direction of Romanian foreign policy and in national security. He or she sits in the Supreme National Security Council, where all decisions are taken on national security. So indeed, he or she, president of Romania, have a very strong role to play on foreign policy and on security policy, but they cannot do that without the government and without the prime minister, because even these attributions, foreign policy and national security, are split between the executive and the presidential office. And so the president has some power, but they're not, it's not a presidential system like we have in the United States, best known, or in France. It's more of a semi-presidential system. The president has significant power, but not only he or she has the power. It's split between them and the prime minister. So it's very important who will be president. But the legislative, the parliamentary elections that are taking place this coming Sunday in between the two rounds of presidency are just as important. And so now we're seeing mainstream and non-mainstream parties creating alliances in order to prepare for both of these elections. And the outcome on Sunday will be also very important for the president.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us. Dr. Yulia Joja, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for having me.
That is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, goodbye.
Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News.
It's very impressive.
Where knowledge meets perspective.
Welcome to the show. I'm Riz Khan. The annual cost of cybercrime is expected to reach $10 trillion next year. To put that figure into context, in terms of GDP, it would be the third biggest economy in the world after the US and China. That's why countries from Australia to China, the UK and US are racing to tighten up their cybersecurity laws. And it's why the UN is expected to pass a landmark cyber treaty in the coming weeks. From deepfakes and disinformation to hacks and attacks on infrastructure, healthcare and security networks, cybercrime is becoming the #1 challenge for law enforcement and intelligence agencies. And artificial intelligence is already changing the rules of the game. Now, our increasingly connected digital world makes us all more vulnerable to criminal gangs and state-sponsored hackers who can access our data and devices. Imagine them taking control of your bank account, your electrical vehicle, and even your pacemaker. Interpol is the world's largest police force. Formed in the aftermath of the First World War, it was established to combat an increasing threat from international crime. Collaboration between countries allowed crime fighting to extend beyond national boundaries. And today, the organization has almost 200 member countries. When it comes to fighting cybercrime, that original principle of collaboration is more important than ever. I met with Dr. Neil Jaton, Interpol's Director of Cybercrime, for an insight into the agency's battle against the hackers. Dr. Jaton, great to have some time with you.
Thanks for having me.
Now, you know, there's this romantic image of what Interpol is. It's like that kind of agents in coffee shops in romantic places like Rome and Paris having secret meetings. It's like the CIA, MI6, I guess. How real is that?
It's spot on. It's exactly like that. No, it's not really like that. But I don't know what a lot of agencies, you have this romantic feeling for it, and then about what you think in your head, what it's going to be, and then you come in to an agency. So I've been here for 2 months, and I didn't really have too many preconceived notions because I've been a federal agent for a long time. So I've kind of been in this space. But I will say that it has been an amazing experience just for the 2 months. And I think the strength of Interpol and the strength of my team within the Cybercrime Directorate is having, there's only roughly 40 to 50 people. There are only 2 Americans. So you're looking at a wide array of cultures and people and bringing all sorts of strengths from their walks of life.
Tell me what your son said when you said you're joining Interpol.
Yeah. Well, my son was very excited. We were actually watching an action movie at that time when we were, so I was living in D.C., and he was like, oh, like that, like James Bond. And I said, no, not exactly. And I explained kind of what I was doing, and he was less than impressed with me. But he was also kind of aware of the romantic notions of, being a federal agent and how that is. And he was like, yeah, you're still just dad,
And I guess the cybercrime area on which you focus, you head, is even more that kind of ethereal area.
I mean, it's so emerging and evolving. It is very, very tough. And I don't think when you come into law enforcement, I don't think most people, maybe nowadays, but when I came in 15 years ago, it wasn't to do cyber crimes or crimes, involving computers. You wanted to knock down doors. You wanted to put people behind, bars. You wanted to really be high speed. And I think nowadays the crime, you can almost just get rid of the word cyber and just call it crime, because there's not a lot of crime that's really not connected now to a computer, to a phone, or some other network system. You really see that. So I do think that as you progress through your career, you may have come in saying, I want to combat this type of crime, but it's very clear that you're going to have some sort of cyber background to be successful.
And yet the Hollywood image is that cyber criminals have the chance to take down entire systems. Airports can be shut down, traffic lights can be changed, right. Like the Die Hard 4 kind of thing. Any reality in that?
I think everything's kind of based a little bit in reality, and then movies are, amplified to, a much higher magnitude. But can bad guys target critical infrastructure and be successful? Sure. You looked at the Colonial Pipeline incident in 2021, the U.S.'s largest fuel pipeline, and what the bad guys were able to do was go through the billing system. And you would think that something maybe as innocuous as that wouldn't have such detrimental effects, but it did. The Colonial Pipeline had to shut down the entire company to contain the breach. Large lines at the pump, concern about fuel availability. So it is a reality, but it's not all doom and gloom. I will say that every day we have these sort of conferences where we come together. We talk about how do we improve cybersecurity. So I think we're making great strides.
How did you react when the CrowdStrike incident happened? It was faulty software, so it wasn't really malicious, but I think it exposed a lot of vulnerabilities.
So for us, we are not in the critical infrastructure, cybersecurity, vulnerability business necessarily. We're in the law enforcement business. For any sort of incident, whether it's a CrowdStrike, that wasn't quite, malicious, through something that is, we really are dependent on the member countries' law enforcement to reach out to us for assistance, or in some cases, maybe we'll have some intelligence through some partners that we're able to push out.
The interesting thing about that incident, though, was that it opened the door for criminals to bounce in quickly.
That's right. They're always looking. And so, again, I think you have all these national security agencies working diligently trying to identify these vulnerabilities to make it much more difficult for hackers.
It does suggest, though, that the fact they can react quickly to what was not a malicious attack and get their malicious attack in, that they're quite ahead of the game.
I do think it's a little bit of a cat and mouse game. I think that the incentive for the bad guys is financial, so that when you are really focused on making a buck, this is how you earn your living. Of course, you're going to be very, very aggressive in identifying these threats. But I will say that law enforcement, Interpol, is forward-looking, looking at emerging technology, looking at the emerging threats, and trying and try to stay right with the criminals.
As director of cybercrime at Interpol, of course, you get to see the extremes, how bad things could be.
Right.
How worried should we be as citizens?
No, I think you should be concerned. Obviously with emerging technology, but AI, quantum computing, those are obviously some issues. But just as being a parent of a child who I'm finally allowing to have a smartphone for the first time as a teenager, we have had to have sit-down conversations with them about the threats. And I'm like, your dad is the director, cybercrime director at Interpol. You cannot be doing these things. You cannot have this app. You're too young. But I'll just say that I think schools are doing a much better job of understanding the issues as well. Parents should take some responsibility, on themselves too.
For many of us, Hollywood is that lens, and cybercrime is seen as young people, sometimes in basements. They're doing things that from their homes, effectively.
Right, in their basements, behind their keyboard.
Is it real?
Yeah, I'm assuming. Yeah, that is quite a bit. I mean, but also it runs the gamut. You may think like, oh, it's a 50-year-old grizzled, person just down in the basement. But no, as you see in some of these ransomware incidents, they're youth. They're not even of legal age, and they're causing this sort of mayhem. So yeah, it's just somebody being able to the ability to have that tech savviness and also the will to actually cause harm. We've seen criminals all ages.
Beyond these, institutions and documents that come out through the UN and so forth, in general, how well is the world keeping up with the threat of cybersecurity, on cybersecurity?
I think well. I mean, obviously, we're always going to. It's really, I think, country dependent. As Interpol, my goal is to bring up those that maybe not as cyber mature, to bring them up to a level so that they can defend themselves, defend their citizens. I do think it's improving.
And then you do need legislation, because one of the biggest frustrations in traditional crime is legal loopholes or the lack of legal infrastructure to be able to lock the bad guys away.
Yeah, so, I mean, again, Interpol is not here to tell a country what to do and how to legislate itself, but we do understand that the legality, the laws have to match the emerging crimes, and, in the U.S., they're having the same issue. So that's really not something that we would directly say, person to person. What I would say, though, from any perspective, what I will say, and I'm not saying that government should make it mandatory, but if you are a victim of cybercrime, whether it's anything from being a business being attacked by ransomware, or a child who's a victim of sexual exploitation, is to contact law enforcement. I know that sometimes it can be very, very difficult to make that, because you're now suffering through the worst day of your life, and now you have to go talk to law enforcement about it. But if you really want to make receive some justice and then help future victims, it is to reach out to law enforcement.
Now, I know you don't tell governments how to legislate and so on, but I do wonder how much it impedes what you can do when it actually comes to enforcing what you're doing.
So for us, our enforcement is only through our member countries' law enforcement agencies. So it's really upon them. We'll provide them as much information, as much support as we can, and then it's on their individual governments what they do at the end of the legislation.
How, again, going to this idea that hackers can create widespread havoc, how much is this kind of DDoS, a term that's come into our vocabulary now, distributed denial of service, how much of a threat is that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you see, so DDoS attacks, that's the slang for it, but
DDoS,
that's okay. So obviously it is a significant avenue of attack. But we, again, if a company or if a business or an entity is suffering from a DDoS attack or any sort of cyber attack, my point of view, and I think you would talk to anybody from law enforcement, is reach out to your local law enforcement, have them, and if they need support, then come to Interpol and Cybercrime Directorate, and we'll do more than anything that we can, we'll do anything that we can help.
Dr. Chetan, what is the biggest challenge that you're facing right now? What eats up your time and resources?
Well, I would always say that funding and finding personnel. Just the, Interpol, we bring in seconded officers. So basically, like myself, I come from the U.S. My home agency pays for me. I am on loan to Interpol for a few years. So it's getting those agencies from all different countries. And we want a wide spectrum. I would have like somebody from every region to come in and be a part of our team. So it's finding, the personnel, it's finding the funding for the different projects that we have. Those are the things that really take a lot of my time.
I guess the great thing about being such a diverse group of people at Interpol is that you do take back these skill sets with you and share them.
Yeah, that's the selling point. Like, we want your best and your brightest. You come to us because I know it's also a sort of a catch-22 when you send somebody who's so good, now they're not with you anymore in your home agency. So I understand that, but my hope is that when you come to us, when you leave in the 3 years, whether sometimes they're short-term secondments for a year, sometimes they're 3 years or extended, my hope is that when you go back, you use the skills that you develop, especially like the diplomacy skills, the ability to mediate, those sort of skills that you may not get as a police officer, as an agent, you take those skills back and enhance your agency.
You explained how this isn't really what you got into. You weren't really going into cybercrime, but of course everything's evolved and it's continually evolving. So is AI, artificial intelligence, your friend or enemy, for example?
No, I think any emerging technology, I'll just say, in my opinion, it's neutral. So it's whoever it's in the hands of, whatever the intent is, that's really whether it's good or bad. And so we understand the criminality of the uses of it, and criminals are always going to take advantage, whether it's AI, quantum computing. I mean, it was computers, 20 years ago, and smartphones and apps and all that. Whatever emerging crime, there's going to be some ingenious criminal who's going to try to find it and exploit it. So again, it's on us as law enforcement to be forward-looking, to say, hey, these are the emerging threats, and how can we combat that? And so within Interpol, we do have an innovation center that's also housed with Singapore that's looking at those very concerns.
This sounds like an echo of guns don't kill people,
yeah,
people kill
it's
people.
the same. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to compare
yeah, of course,
one to the other, but again, it really is how you use it, because I think there's going to be some great uses with AI, obviously, and then obviously there's going to be some negatives.
I think the way I've heard you put it is that basically technology is agnostic.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's how I feel.
In terms of keeping up with everything, do you have the resources to be able to keep up?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, obviously, could we always use more funding? Could we always use more personnel? Of course. I mean, any agency could. But what we should do, and I think in Cybercrime Directorate, is we should be more forward leaning and continued sustained communications with our 196 member countries to actually ask them, what do you need? Because we may think from Singapore, these are the cyber concerns that we think you should be concerned about, and yet it may not be. So that's part of my strategy, is to conduct outreach with those members to say, what exactly do you need from Interpol?
How do you regard the term cyber psychology, and how does that fit in with what you do?
For me, from a law enforcement perspective, what I want to always look at is when we go and interview a victim, whether the victim is a business, a hospital, and have to talk to the CISO who's now suffering through stress, and I'm not comparing them, or to talk to somebody who's been a victim of some sort of sexual exploitation, especially with children, is to understand that is their worst day. And so for law enforcement, I think our goal is always to get the evidence, to get the interview, and then go on and catch the bad guy and stop the next thing from happening. But I think from law enforcement, we have to take a step back and realize that these are some bad days, the worst days that these people are suffering through, to show them some grace, show them some kindness at the same time.
Technology is moving fast, but let me wrap up by asking you if you could paint me a picture of what the cybercrime scene might look like maybe a decade from now.
So, I mean, I wish I had a magic ball and I knew who to invest in, which companies were going to be a part. But obviously AI, I mean, that's the buzzword, AI. I think quantum, computing and the encryption that's going to, become problematic in the future. I think those are things that I'm sure criminals are already salivating at the thought of. I think that there are the law enforcement, other government agencies that are also looking at that and saying, no, we're going to be ready for this. We're going to, maybe not everything, but we're actually, the focus isn't just going to be on for the criminals. We're actually going to concentrate on these things too. So I will just say, though, that Interpol has been in existence. We just celebrated our 100th anniversary last year. So 1923 to 2023. And so in 10 years, I think the Interpol and Interpol's Cybercrime Directorate will still be combating, transnational cybercrime, and still being a good partner to 196 member countries.
Dr. Neil Jaton, thank you very much. Good luck with your work.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
At Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News.
It's very impressive.
Where knowledge meets perspective.